salutations, everybody. This is David Bixenspan here with another edition of 605, the Superpodcast, the only podcast that runs on Turner Time. I am joined, as always, by the great Brian Last.
Bix.
Oh, no.
No, I'm just fucking with you. I'm not going to do it.
Oh, thank God.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back for another week of 605, the only podcast that guarantees there will not be an appearance by the Black Scorpion this week. How's it going, Bix?
I thought that was the Shockmaster.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm doing well. How are you?
How much snow did you get?
Less than you.
Yeah, we got 33 inches.
So does Robert Fuller.
Oh, man, I was going to make that joke. You beat me to it. You son of a bitch. Well, anyway.
I feel terrible that I made the joke.
I did want to follow up on something from last week because it's kind of driving me crazy.
Yeah.
So I mentioned in the Iron Mike Sharp portion of the show that I remembered an angle or something from 1988 when I was a really young fan. I saw this where, and I think it may have been Toronto, where Iron Mike Sharp and Bad News Brown, started going at it. And I remember it so vividly because I remember thinking they almost look like a tag team. They're both in black trunks. They had, very similar outfits. And I want to say it may have been during when Bad News Brown worked with Randy Savage. Well, everyone on Twitter hit me up and said, "Oh, you're thinking of when Bad News Brown worked with the Brooklyn Brawler." And I want to point out that I know the difference between the Brooklyn Brawler and Iron Mike Sharp, and that's not what I meant. And I do remember that from 1989. So if anyone out there remembers 1988, any sort of short program or any sort of one-night thing between Bad News Brown and Iron Mike Sharp, please let us know. I don't want this to be a figment of my imagination. I know, Bix, recently you had something like this where you insisted that you remembered an angle from All Japan where,
yes.
What was it? Where Dynamite pile drove Davey Boy through a table?
It was the Dynamite, Dynamite, Johnny Smith, and Davey Boy were teaming in a six-man, and that they turned on Davey when Davey was finishing up with All Japan by Spike pile driving him through a table at ringside, behind the rail and everything.
And similar to what I'm encountering now, no one remembered it and everyone said you're wrong. It happened. You're thinking of Stampede. You're thinking of the wrong thing, right?
Right. And, some people, I think Matt Farmer saying, Baba wouldn't have done an angle like that in, 1990 or whatever it was. The only explanation I can think of is if it didn't happen is that I do recall the Best of Dynamite Kid tape that I thought it was on. I do recall watching it while I was at home sick one day. So maybe I imagined it. Maybe I dreamed it, but I'm pretty sure I saw it.
You must have been really sick. They envisioned some sort of hardcore angle in All Japan Pro Wrestling.
Well, I mean, they still had a little bit of that going on then, as far as, because they were the home of Brody and Abby and Hanson. I mean, it wasn't ridiculous.
Was there ever anything they did incorporating a table?
Like in the 80s? Like
80s or 90s, well, early 90s. I mean, I don't remember anything after that. I mean, it was still, pretty great stuff with Misawa and Kabashi. But at that point in time, late 80s, was there ever anything involving furniture?
Not that I could.
Any sort?
I mean, there were still chairs and all
chairs,
at least through the early 90s. There's the not necessarily famous thing where Stan Hansen beat the hell out of the Black Hearts with the chairs. But I can't think of anything else, but I don't know. Yeah, if anyone saw this, and I can't remember for the life of me who originally made the comp tape. It was someone who, how it occasionally you'd come across tape traders who either had something that they'd plug their computer into their VCR, or they had a character generator or something, and occasionally you'd get someone who tried to put very rudimentary graphics on best of tapes they made. So this was one of those. And I just don't remember, and I haven't talked to him in a long time. I think I remember who I got it from. So if somebody he remembers watching it. But yes, so we both have a shared thing going on there.
Please.
Not the same angle.
No, but if anyone has any memories of a Bad News Brown, Iron Mike Sharp deal, or the British Bulldogs breakup in All Japan incorporating a table, please get at me and Bix because it is driving us mad as we speak. So moving on from there, Bix, there's a lot to go over. And obviously this week we do a whole bunch of stuff about the death of Archie Gouldie, the Mongolian Stomper, the Stomper, and we're going to get into that shortly. But there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about. The Wrestling Observer newsletter just put out their awards. It's I think he started in '83, but he has awards going back to 1980. Is that correct?
I believe the earlier awards, the pre-newsletter awards, I think are the ones Dave named himself.
He just
or it's. I'm not sure if I feel like there's some that Dave named himself, or he might have done voting with his friends who he's trading tapes with on some. It's not. If someone asked Dave, he probably I'm sure he knows, but I can never remember exactly what it was for the first few years.
You know, and there's a lot of awards that have gone away. A lot of awards that used to be there and have gone away. And some of them, I guess you could understand why. But some of them, I wonder why they're not there. You know, he used to have the most embarrassing wrestler, which was around from 86 to 2003. And, you know, there are still wrestlers that embarrass me. So I wonder what made him get rid of that.
I don't know. I didn't realize it went through that late, though. I figured it was gone before then.
Yeah, here are some of the past award winners, and let's think if there was someone someone who should have won that didn't. But I'll only go through the first several years up until when Hulk Hogan ran away with it. 1986, Adrian Adonis. I could certainly understand that.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's anyone else because the whole thing's very weird and it's a punishment, sort of, or whatever the deal was with that gimmick. And doesn't he get fired for part of the year mysteriously? And
well. Did he get? I mean, when was his fight with Dan Spivey? Yeah,
I don't remember. I mean, it probably would have been 80. Well, it probably would have been 86 because that's when it was. Spivey was there 86 to 87, so it would have been around that time. Yeah,
yeah. Spivey got there at the end of 85 because remember he started where one day he came out with Paul Orndorff as his tag team partner and no one knew who he was, and just boom, right away he was.
Yeah, as we've talked about before, and then all of a sudden he's sort of replacement Barry Windham.
Yeah,
I mean, he did replace Barry Windham, but they sort of pretended he was Barry Windham. Except if Barry Windham was named Dan Spivey.
So
it's hard to explain if you've never seen it.
No. But I mean, when Dan Spivey debuts at the end of 85 in World Wrestling Federation, he debuts wearing yellow tights, very much looking like Hulk Hogan because he had the long blonde hair and he had the yellow outfit. And then pretty quickly, when Barry Windham's gone, they put him in the team with Mike Rotunda as a replacement. They call the team the U.S. Express, just like they did before, and he looks like Barry Windham. Unless you if you're just looking at him from behind and not paying attention to work rate, he looks just like Barry Windham. And they certainly tried to pass it off like this was Barry Windham.
But they never said he was Barry. They just acted like they brought him out and acted like nothing changed. Is the best way to put it, I guess.
Yes. And you know what changed? Like 4.5 stars. That's what changed.
I don't know when the last time you would have seen this was, because of course we're getting sidetracked as we should. The match where the U.S. Express won the tag titles for the first time from Adonis and Murdoch, which, you know, there's only a joined in progress version that aired on TV, and I don't know if it was the same version or whatever that was on the Tag Team Champions home video. Do you remember the last time you ever watched that?
Let me think, because I just recently, this past year,
it's watched possible the that
of 85 Championship Wrestling. So I remember vividly them winning the titles back from Volkov and the Sheik. I don't remember if I saw the Adonis and Murdoch title change recently.
Okay, because I'm trying to remember if I sent it to you the last time I watched it, because it was on Daily Motion. Someone had put it up from the TV version. For those who don't know, it was in Hartford, I think. And they shot it, but it wasn't lit like it was a title change. I think they had learned from their past mistakes where they would light up the arena big for a title change at a house show they didn't normally tape and give away that it was going to be a title change. What aired on TV, like the last 5 or 6 minutes or whatever, looks incredible. Like, I didn't remember that it looked as good as it did.
I mean, think about it, though. Murdoch and Adonis are coming off that great run with the Briscoes right before this match.
Yes, but it looks like it could be the best WWF match of the 80s from what aired on TV. Wow.
It's a hell of a statement there.
And I would think they have the whole match. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily suitable for... I mean, they did use... they released part of it, so I would think it's suitable for airing. That's one I would love to see someday, which I would think they have. But... yeah, so anyone who's never seen that or doesn't remember it, I think it's on Daily Motion, so look that up. So who else won Most Embarrassing Wrestler?
So 86 was Adonis, and then 87 and 88, George the Animal Steele.
Sure.
You know, I mean, who else? I mean, would you say by that point Jimmy Valiant was pretty embarrassing?
Yes. I'm trying to think. Is there anyone in Memphis in those years, like weird gimmicks and stuff, that you would argue?
Yeah, nothing's popping into my head, but I guarantee there was.
I mean, you know, Wheel of Torture with Vanna Black is not a wrestler.
No, and that certainly isn't eligible for most disgusting promotional tactic. But
I mean, not. You know, I don't think anyone would say that about Superstar Bubba.
Well, here's an interesting one. 89, most embarrassing wrestler, Andre the Giant. Now, this is the year of the Ding Dongs.
Yeah, that's... Come on. The dynamic
Andre,
dudes.
Yeah, I mean, Andre was, you know, slow and big, but I could tell you as a 9-year-old at the time, to me, he was a scary monster.
Yes.
He wasn't so... I can't imagine someone watched him and was embarrassed to be a professional wrestling fan.
No. I would definitely put the dynamic dudes above him.
Yeah.
Who else? The Ding Dongs. So far, just tag teams, weirdly. I'm trying to think. Is there any, like, in WWE?
When was Colonel De Beers? I guess Colonel De Beers would have been a couple of years before this.
He started in 86 is when the gimmick started. I could see an argument for Colonel De Beers in 86.
Yeah. I mean, especially for his interviews. 1990, Dusty Rhodes.
1990, also the years where Colonel De Beers exclaims, "That referee is a black man. I will not have a black..." I think that's 19... Or was it 91? I think it was 90. "I will not have a black man referee my match."
Well, you know, a couple other awards he got rid of are readers' favorite and least favorite wrestlers. And, you know,
Well, because the winner of favorite was always Ric Flair.
It was Ric Flair, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, and then again in 96. Somehow he jumped back in there one last time. And then least favorite wrestler, this should be a fun list. 84, Ivan Putski.
Interesting. That's an interesting one. I would not have. It's understandable, but I don't think I would have expected it either.
Why not?
Who else is in WWF then? Sure. I mean, it's fine. I'm not objecting to it.
85, 86, Hulk Hogan.
85, I think. I mean, it's the most subjective possible award, so I'm not objecting to anyone picking him. I think in 85, it's not really warranted. Because 85, he was still having pretty good matches and stuff. 86 is when he kind of turned into overbearing Hogan.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. We say that's least favorite wrestler. Worst wrestler, 1984, was also Ivan Putski.
Sure.
84, Ivan Putski. 85, Uncle Elmer. 86, Mike Von Erich.
Aww.
Well, he was especially awful.
He was, but come on. Did people not realize yet that he was brain damaged? Or
yeah, you know, I mean, even though we've now discovered that it was out there, that it was on the George Michael Sports Machine, where it was flat out said, and obviously if you see any footage of him, especially the post-hospitalization interview in the hospital, he clearly is, you know, I hate to say it, but he's brain damaged by that point.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Like, was it acknowledged in Heroes of World Class or anything like that? Did any of the family or anything say? Well, the family. Did Kevin?
I don't remember if Kevin said it, but I seem to remember in the non-WWF documentary, it was said. It was pointed out that, you know, his brain fried because of his fever, which was whatever 106.
We've heard. I think it's like what they usually say is 106 or 107. Which, if it's real, I mean, yeah, that's going to cause brain damage.
And then after Mike Von Erich, Junkyard Dog wins in 87 and again in 1990.
I mean, 87 was when really he just completely fell off a cliff, I guess.
Yes, because 86 he was still working with Terry Funk, so there was still good matches.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fine. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if his interviews were still good.
I mean, I don't think I don't think anyone's ever accused him of his interviews of dropping off, have they?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like a weird pick, sort of. Like, I don't know. I mean, if his interviews were still good, but it's also people are seeing him as the cartoonized Junkyard Dog.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, just trying to think who would I pick if I was. His interviews on Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling were still pretty good, you know. You mean in the live action segments, or are you talking about James Avery's promo?
I'm talking about James. Hey, Tito, let's hang out. Worst tag team. This is always fun. 84, the Crusher and Baron von Raschke. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any argument there. 85, Uncle Elmer and Cousin Junior.
Yes.
86. Oh, these matches. Junkyard Dog and George the Animal Steel.
They teamed up together?
Seemingly. They won the worst tag team of the year.
Oh, did they work a program with Dory and Jimmy Jack?
I'm not sure. Not sure. Possibly.
Boy, for a guy who was a pretty good worker, Jesse Barr sure did fall off once he became Jimmy Jack Funk.
Well, so many guys went to the World Wrestling Federation and just fell off.
Well, even after he left WWF, though.
Yeah, well, he was dealing with, post-traumatic Haku disorder. So it may have really affected him by that point. 1987 worst tag team, Jimmy Valiant and Bugsy McGraw.
Yes.
Yeah. 88, the Bolsheviks, Nikolai Volkov and Boris Zukov.
Yes.
89, the Powers of Pain, the Warlord and the Barbarian.
It's the Barbarian. How can they win over Bolsheviks?
Well, when you say, it's the Barbarian, I can go, it's the Warlord. Which may just cut into that argument. 1990, Giant Baba and Andre the Giant, who also won in 91. So 2 years in a row they won that award.
I guess. Their match against... Wait, did they have a match with Land of the Giants? Of the Battle of the Giants, or am I thinking of something else? Land of the Giants being what's his name? I always forget. Was it Nitron and Bushmasters or something?
Yeah, I don't know if they had a match. I'm not sure. That sounds like the worst match of all time.
Yes, I think that's Baba could still have good matches with the right people who knew how to work with him. Just those were he was usually not working with people who knew how to work with him, except in the tag tournament.
Right. Well, the two awards that Dave Meltzer has done away with, the ones that I really think it's inappropriate in a sense. I think they should be brought back. I can understand the argument for them disappearing for a good time when everyone was a tweener in the late 90s, but best babyface and best heel. I think it's appropriate for those to be there because obviously a few years ago, Daniel Bryan was best face because he was a good guy being cheered by the audience. It wasn't like there was nothing shady about it. It wasn't like a guy being a heel getting cheered.
Right.
He was just a flat out babyface being cheered. And I mean, Dave has done away with this. I actually tweeted him the other day saying, hey, you should bring this back. And of course, that was the one tweet he didn't respond to, on that day. But, previous award winners, look, Dusty Rhodes, Tommy Rich, Hogan won year after year after year. Atsushi Onita, Sting. I don't know. Best box office draw is what he has now.
And he says he has said in the past that he sees Best Babyface as the predecessor to Best Box Office Draw.
Right. Well, I think he has Best Babyface and Best Heel. Then now those past award winners are listed in the section under Best Box Office Draw. But I mean, how are you supposed to vote for Best Box Office Draw? How's that supposed to be an objective category? That's like voting for Best Rating. I don't know. I really think Best Heel and Best Babyface have a place in.
I agree.
Should be there.
I mean, not to get too far out of our wheelhouse, but would you want to quickly go over who you think would be the picks for the last year or two?
Yeah, we don't want to get too far away. Let's see. Unfortunately, Seth Rollins was such a chicken shit heel that I can't vote for him for Best Heel.
Yeah, and Daniel Bryan, I mean, he's the actual best, but, the injuries the last couple of years. And Sami Zayn, too, for last year, was injured out so much of the time. Yeah,
I mean, Sami Zayn would have been strong. Tanahashi's a strong candidate.
Nakamura for Best Babyface.
Nakamura, yeah, absolutely. Okada maybe Best Heel. I mean, I hate to just focus on New Japan, but they actually treat their guys.
Well, and for best babyface, I would also throw in Atlantis.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You have to do that too.
And for best heel, well, you know what? Okada's like, he kind of straddles the line anyway. And then there's the whole weird dynamic of how he stablemates with Nakamura, even though Nakamura is kind of clearly a babyface. But
right.
Really, I think best heel, though, you'd have to say Rush.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to run through my head. Like, you can't say Brock for either one of them because he is that perfect tweener where, he didn't really have a babyface or a heel role. He was just Brock.
Right.
And obviously Roman Reigns was a horrible babyface because the fans didn't accept him as a babyface.
Right. Is there anyone in WWE you'd consider even for best heel? Because I feel like the closest is Kevin Owens, but even then he has his flaws.
Yeah, I mean, if he had been full-time active as a wrestler, Triple H would obviously be up there probably.
Yeah, and also for Mexico, I would throw in La Sombra for last year.
Yeah, oh yeah. So, but I don't want to get too away from us and talk about current wrestling. The one other thing from the Observer Awards I want to talk about are previous winners of Match of the Year. Obviously, as we just said, before 83, the awards didn't come from readers voting in the Observer. So 1980 had Backlund against Patera at Madison Square Garden. 81, the famous alley fight between Patterson and Slaughter. 82, Tiger Mask versus Dynamite Kid in Tokyo. 83 is the one I've never liked, and that is Ric Flair defeating Harley Race in a steel cage with Gene Kiniski as the referee for the NWA Championship at the very first Starrcade.
Isn't there also some distinction with 83 and maybe the previous years too between best match you saw and match that happened that you're most looking forward to seeing?
I don't remember there being one. You're saying there was one in the newsletter?
I thought there was in the first few years.
I don't recall that. If there was,
maybe in 83. Because, well, remember, 83, the yearbook was the first issue of the Observer.
No.
I thought it was.
No, they were issued. You're talking about the one with Michael Hayes on the cover?
Am I thinking of a different? I'm thinking of 82.
Okay, yeah. So, the Ric Flair Harley Race one was the one with Michael Hayes on the cover, which was the end of 83.
Yeah, that's not a good. That's not even their best match together.
It's not even their best match that year.
Together. It's at best their third best match together that year.
Yeah, that match is a match I've never enjoyed for whatever reason. From the
I can think of one big Canadian reason.
Yeah, Gene Kiniski, the Big Thunder, him. From the camera angles, which I thought were terrible, to the worst flying crossbody of Ric Flair's career by far. There's a reason why guys always caught him and threw him, so he wouldn't do what he did the Harley Race. And Gene Kiniski winning the Bronco Lubitsch Award for best, worst job counting to 3. Yeah, that match is one I just can't. I've never enjoyed whatsoever. And there's so many better. I mean, I think the Briscoes against Steamboat and Youngblood is a better match on that show.
So is Piper and Valentine.
So is Piper Valentine. So
I'm just trying to think what else would people have seen on tape that year.
Well, obviously that's the year of the. I mean, no one saw it back then. For years, it was like the last Battle of Atlanta, where everyone presumed that there was no tape and it was gone. But nowadays, we can see Slaughter and Kernodle against Youngblood and Steamboat.
Right. But again, the 2 out of 3 Falls Dynamite Tiger Mask was that year, wasn't it? Or was that 82?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I thought it was 83 because wasn't that the last match of the feud?
I mean, that sounds right. I don't know for sure what year.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head what else people would have seen. I feel like
the Terry Funk retirement match.
Yes, that's a good one.
Which was what? Terry and Dory against Brody and Gouldie?
Hanson and Gouldie, I think.
Hanson and Gouldie, excuse me. Yes, that's right.
Which you had never seen until I gave you a copy.
Yeah. Which you gave me a copy of that, I want to say 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I had seen clips of it in really, really awful quality, like quality that matched the awful quality that was in Beyond the Mat. So that when you gave it to me, it was actually the first time I had seen it crystal clear.
And I had gotten that from... do you remember the other Mike Rogers who spelled it differently? Not the Ring Around the Northwest guy?
I do not. Bootleg Mike Rogers? I don't know him.
Okay, he was a guy who had a tape list, and then but have you heard of Dave's Wrestling Emporium or Wrestling Emporium?
Yes, I remember that.
So he had like bought this guy's collection, and when I first got his tape list and stuff, he had it like at the end of it. And I believe he still has a website that sells DVDs for however too much. I don't know if anyone buys anything from him or what, but he had from this Mike Rogers guy, and it had, among just various other stuff, it was called Terry Funk Retirement Special, and it was the TV. I guess it was the TV special with that match, and also had some other stuff dubbed on the end. It was the whole thing was such a great presentation. That whole thing. I mean, actually, I'm surprised that, because I would think the Observer readership at that time is mostly tape traders still. I mean, maybe less than it would have been a year earlier.
I would say predominantly tape traders. And here's the other thing: when you say who saw it. And the argument can almost be there also for the Slaughter Kernodle Steamboat Youngblood match. I don't know how many people saw Starrcade by that point. So, I mean, people were voting for Flair versus Race. How many of them actually saw that match? Because that match took place Thanksgiving night, and the awards were right after that.
Yeah, I don't know when exactly the deadline would have been or anything.
Right. So it doesn't even give you much time for a tape to circulate. And I don't know how many tapes there were of that match at that time circulating. A question we may have to ask Mr. Jim Cornette when he's on again. Ask him about when he first saw that match, so we'll have an idea when it was in circulation.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Any other match of the year choices you were wanting to talk about?
I moved past that to Rookie of the Year. Hold on, let me go back. Let's see.
The thing about Rookie of the Year is that it's more fun when you can see the runner-ups.
Yeah,
runners-up.
Totally. Because, I mean, just looking at Rookie of the Year here, 1981, Brad Armstrong and Brad Ringens.
Tie.
2 Brads. Isn't that something?
Yes.
Tied. 82, Steve Dr. Death Williams.
Well, it was Dave naming the awards themselves so he can give them a tie. Put them in a tie.
See, that brings up the question, where were these awards generated from if there was a tie? 83, the Road Warriors. I think that's a fine pick.
Yeah.
They were a sensation from the beginning. 84, there's another tie. Kichi Yamada, the later to be Jushin Thunder Liger, and Tom Zink, later to be a caller on IATA.com.
And I believe wasn't the runner-up Jack Victory?
Jack Victory won in 85.
Oh, okay. Jack Victory won in 85 because people don't realize just how enamored Dave was with Jack Victory as a rookie. If you read those old Observers.
Yeah.
And he did not look like a guy who had just started wrestling.
No, he was pretty good.
He was very good.
And he always threw a great punch.
Yes.
And, him and Hollywood John Tatum were an underrated tag team. A lot of fun to watch them together.
Definitely.
85's Jack Victory. 86 is Bam Bam Bigelow. Which year was Owen Hart that he would have been a runner-up? Was it 85 or 86?
It would have been 86.
86. So Bam Bam Bigelow beat Owen Hart, who, Owen Hart was always good. And I'm not trying to put him down, but he was, when he first debuted, he was like the darling of the tape traders because he was so dynamic at that time.
Yes, but I mean, Bam Bam's a hell of a pick, too. I mean,
yeah.
No shame in losing Rookie of the Year to 1986 Bam Bam Bigelow.
Oh.
I mean, because, we talk about sometimes between the sheets because Bam Bam always comes up. You can make a pretty strong argument that his career year, as far as great matches, is his rookie year.
That's an interesting argument. His rookie year, he's in Memphis, right? And he's in World Class?
I mean, Memphis, and then, World Class, he doesn't do much. Or if you can say, like, his first 2 years, because all of his best Memphis stuff is all in those first couple of years.
It's an interesting argument. What is the best year of Bam Bam Bigelow's career? What was his best year in Japan?
For matches or for, like, because
For matches. We're talking match quality, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, 92 when he's teaming with Vader?
Probably.
Because, I mean, the stuff like when he's in All Japan with Kobashi, that was kind of disappointing.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
The Inoki feud wasn't much, when he came in 87. So I would say 92 would be his best year in Japan.
Yeah. Well, anyway, those are the Observer Awards, everyone. Feel free to contact Dave Meltzer and tell him to bring back Best Heel and Best Babyface. He can leave out Strongest Wrestler.
I would have asked for him to bring that back so Mark Henry can win every year.
Strongest Wrestler. That's another one. It's like, how are you supposed to objectively vote for that? He spent too much time in the gym back then. But anyway, moving right along, I mentioned something to Bix earlier this week that I thought would be fun to discuss. And it is, what do you think would be, or let's think of several that could possibly be, the most televised match of all time? The match that was on television the most. The first few things that popped into my head.
And to be clear, we're talking about an individual match, not a pairing that would have been rerun the most.
Right. So my thought, the first three things that popped out to me were Ric Flair against Kerry Von Erich at Texas Stadium, Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik, title change.
Yes.
And of course, that was the intro to Championship Wrestling for 2 years. So
I wouldn't count that, though.
No, but I feel like a lot of people a lot of people felt they saw the match before they saw the match.
Yes.
Because it was in their face every week.
Correct.
And then, of course, the legendary IWCCW Vic Steamboat versus Tony Atlas.
And I would also throw in Jumping Joe Savoldi against the Tasmaniac.
I was going to say Taz versus Surfer Ray Odyssey. I remember seeing over and over and over again.
And didn't they would also, I think they also showed the Tony Atlas heel turn a lot.
Yeah, and they showed the battle for the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, Rick Rude and the Honky Tonk Man.
But that was not a match, though.
Wasn't a match, but it was something that happened in, I would guess, 1990, 91.
It was, I think, they were 91, right before Rude went to WCW.
And they were showing that thing for like years after that.
Yes.
When you knew neither guy was going to be there ever again.
Yes. Who is the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time? Who has the greatest neckbreaker finishing hold of all time?
Who's least likely to ever appear on this television show ever again?
You could say that about every single eye angle that promotion ever shot.
Oh my God. There's a tape collection that still sits there that someone needs to get their hands on.
The
Parsippany, New Jersey, right?
Yes.
Isn't that where some of all these are?
You know who a few years ago was saying that he was visiting their storage facility and seeing what they had and how they were going to do something with it. It was amazing. Your old friend Ricky O.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Nothing came of it.
Not surprising. Yeah, I mean, because they have the IWCCW collection, and then they have the random stuff they stole throughout the years. Like when they aired UWF on TV for 2 weeks in a row in the fall of 1992.
And South Atlantic and...
Yeah. Well, did they air South Atlantic and the NAWA, or was that a separate deal where they got on TV?
I remember them just airing South Atlantic for a couple weeks and then going back to whatever. And, you know, later when they would do their DVDs and stuff, they had some South Atlantic.
Okay. And that's a weird promotion right there. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, later to be NAWA. You remember there was a second NAWA with Tony Capone.
Yes.
That aired on New York TV. Because I remember being excited by it because all of a sudden the Lightning Kid was on again.
Yeah, Lightning Kid was back. Global.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden there he was, you know, doing a senton onto his head or, you know, whatever he was doing back then.
In Brooklyn, you had your WWF guys on off days, like you had Brooklyn Brawler, and I think, was Lanny Poffo on that, or no?
I don't remember Lanny Poffo. I remember the Brooklyn Brawler.
And then you had the homegrown star, or it seemed like that they wanted to be, was the Condor.
The Condor! Oh my God! I forgot about the Condor.
Not to be confused with fellow bird-themed New York wrestler Falcon Coparis.
This Falcon Coparis is the Condor. There's been an eagle. What other bird-named wrestlers have there been?
I don't know.
Well, there's the Birdman Coco Beware, obviously. That's a given.
Was Coco Beware in any matches that were aired over and over? That's my terrible segue.
Yeah.
Back to...
I'm not sure. Obviously, we all saw his dropkick on Gustavo Mendoza over and over, which was in the opening of the old UWF.
Want to hear something that completely broke my heart?
Uh-oh. Got Gustavo Mendoza? What happened?
No.
Oh. Is he okay? Gustavo.
Not the episode where the dropkick happens, but the following week where they just open the show with it to show how great it was.
Right.
That episode is on WWE Network, but they cut that out.
What?
Like, there's I think it's Coco Ware versus Eddie Gilbert later, and on commentary, Jim Ross is like, as he saw at the beginning of the program. I'm like, huh?
Why would they cut that out?
Reasons? I mean, maybe a tape issue. I mean, If there's no music thing that impedes it, I think the idea is kind of when in doubt, assume something was wrong with the tape.
You know, with the Smoky Mountain stuff they've been airing, I noticed they left in the original Smoky Mountain Wrestling theme song, which was from the old National Enquirer television commercials.
Is that what that's from? The da 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 da
Yeah.
da da da.
Old commercials for the National Enquirer when they would, like, you know, give all the sensational headlines. That was the music behind it.
I'm gonna guess that they, with the current technology, they're able to tell what production music and what, and if they have the rights to it.
Well, I'm not sure about that, and that's actually a good segue as something I want to bring up, and this may be an ongoing thing here on the show. If you're a regular listener, and I hope you are, you know that me and Bix really care a lot about wrestling history and preserving wrestling history. You know, we have both independently and together gone out of our way to figure out what tape libraries still exist, trying to find ways to preserve them, trying to find ways to get these existing tapes out there so that people can see the great professional wrestling that happened in the yesteryears, and also just make sure things exist. You know, there's always the chase for things that are gone. We talk about the last Battle of Atlanta, Tommy Rich against Buzz Sawyer in '83. Nothing's ever turned up for that, and people have looked. For years, it was assumed that the Greensboro match between Don Kernodle and Sergeant Slaughter against Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat in a steel cage was gone.
Although there were always rumors about that, and then people, when they'd hear about it, the finish being missing would be discussed, and then it turned out that was true.
Right. And later on, I believe it turned up because Boris Zukov himself, Jim Nelson, actually had beta tapes of it, right?
Yeah, he had dubbed a copy of it for himself, and then Don Kernodle had a copy that he had dubbed from Jim Nelson's, which is what, but he still had the finish because he dubbed it before Arn Anderson accidentally taped over the finish.
What was Arn Anderson trying to record that he taped over?
It was like it was some kind of news broadcast. I remember because the whole story was on it when Jim Nelson had the website. Like, he had the whole explanation of why, and like an extra on the DVD was, instead of having the gap edited out, they showed like what was taped over for the few seconds, and like what they used with what they put on the tape
of all the spots to press record. That the finish of the match.
And then, like, I guess the version the tape traders have now, because I'm guessing that's what floated around, is that someone then edited, because it was a generation down, they edited the finish from the Don Kernodle copy into the Jim Nelson copy.
Right. So there's always this search for what's out there, and it's always a blessing when things turn up and things are put on YouTube that are not owned by the World Wrestling Federation, or World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE. I don't even think you're supposed to actually say the words World Wrestling Entertainment. It's just initials now.
But the company is World Wrestling Entertainment.
Yeah. So something happened today, actually, that infuriated me. And I want to bring it up because I think it's something we should bring attention to, and maybe something where if eventually we make enough noise, something will be done. Beau James, the King of Kingsport, who you will hear shortly here on the show, a good friend of our show, the resident expert in Tennessee wrestling, he put up a tape. I shouldn't say tape. He put up a video file of Bob Armstrong against the Mongolian Stomper from 1975 in Louisville, Kentucky, under the auspices of Gouldie Welch. And he got flagged. The WWE put a claim in saying they own the footage.
Now, my first question, of course, do we know if this was an automated flag?
We don't. I don't know. I mean, Beau,
Okay.
You would have to ask Beau that. But even... they in no way, shape, or form own those rights. Because even if you want to argue, and I don't think this is true either, that they own the Memphis rights, that somehow Jerry Lawler sold them something. And there's a big argument to be made about what he could have sold and what he can't sell based on what would be in the public domain, and also what was actually owned by what the company ended up being. But this was 1975 for Gouldie Welch. Jerry Jarrett's company that he started in 77 was separate from this company. So if the tapes that exist that would possibly be sold as part of a Memphis collection are from that company and everything it turned into, this is outside of that. There is no way they have any rights to any of this footage.
Right. Now, because I've talked to Beau about this a little bit too. I know some of what happened is that his channel got on WWE's radar. Like, if there has been human intervention, it's because sometimes some flags would go up automatically because some of the stuff he's uploaded, Jim Cornette edited into episodes of Smoky Mountain when he would bring back older wrestlers or do tributes or whatever.
Right. He told me they actually put in a claim against the footage he used from 71 or maybe it was 72 in Knoxville with Ron Wright on John Kazana's
right,
Knoxville
because
wrestling
it
show.
aired in the thing, when he did I think for Night of Legends and also for the
Yes.
Ron Wright tribute at Fire on the Mountain 95.
Correct.
That clip aired on there. So if it's automated, because of the way they do it is that they fingerprint digitally everything in the library, it's pretty fascinating technologically, to be honest, that they can do this. And then if you upload something that has that, it automatically gets flagged. And people who do this, it'll say what it matched to, and you can sort of figure out what WWE has from that. And I know people who will upload random stuff to try to figure out if WWE has it digitized yet. Look, that's not WWE's fault if that gets flagged. If there is a human intervening and just saying, "Oh, we own this," that's bad.
Well, I could be wrong, but I don't think the Bob Armstrong Mongolian Stomper match aired on Smoky Mountain TV. I'm not certain. It may have aired when they were doing the videos to bring in the Stomper for the first time at the end of 1992 to wrestle Kevin Sullivan. I know they aired Stomper against Dennis Condrey from Memphis in 1975. I don't know, and I don't think this match aired. It may have.
But it is from that same set of footage, which Cornette has, and blah, 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 and had the whole thing with Ron Martinez, because PM Film used to sell that stuff, and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, it's possible that if he did show it, it would make sense. But
where I get frustrated is just, here we are. Professional wrestling is something we love. And the WWE puts out their DVDs and their documentaries, and it's a very slanted and untruthful version of professional wrestling history. And, we want to preserve the actual wrestling history, the actual story of what this business was. And when they go out there and make claims and try to stop this footage from being out there, footage that they probably don't own the rights to, footage that they aren't exploiting in any way. So it's not like it's preventing them from exploiting anything. I feel like something needs to be done. We need to crack down with Beau and find out what notifications he received from YouTube, so that way we know if it's computerized or if it was based on human intervention. Yeah. But I was infuriated when I heard about this. Mongolian Stomper just died, and Beau puts up this tape as nothing more than tribute, and the WWE goes up there and tries to say that it's their footage.
Yeah, when I talked to him, because I didn't talk to him about it since this happened, I did talk to him about it several weeks back, and I believe he did tell me that there was some human intervention on something that they didn't own.
Well,
I think maybe a Southeastern clip or something.
Well, going forward, this is absolutely going to be something that we look into here on the show and keep up with. If you know of any other tapes that the WWE does not own that have been pulled off YouTube or they filed claims against on YouTube, let us know, because we want to make this an ongoing thing where we really hold them to task and make sure that this is something that, we could at least try to fight back against. Because, again, we just want to preserve wrestling history, the truthful wrestling history. And that's all I'll say about that at this time.
Okay.
So, mention a Stomper. And by the way, Beau is going to have on his website, kingofkingsport.com, a blog and as well as a video feature about the Mongolian Stomper. It'll be up by the time this show airs. So please, kingofkingsport.com, and check that out. Support Beau, because Beau has been a big supporter of ours. So let's share the wealth. Yeah. And I guess as we move forward now, we should talk a little bit about the Mongolian Stomper, Bix. Archie Gouldie, the Mongolian Stomper, passed away this past week at the age of 78. What were your first memory? When did you first see or hear about the Mongolian Stomper?
I'm trying to think. I mean, it might... Because I'm trying to think, was he on, any of the Wrestling Gold type tapes in any form? From San Antonio or something?
Yeah, I was about to say, I think maybe the cage match against Dick Slater might have been.
Yes. Okay, so that's probably the first time I ever saw it.
Right. With me, it was Smoky Mountain Wrestling when they brought him in to face Kevin Sullivan. I'd never heard of him before. I hate to say this now, but from the magazines at that time, I had heard of the Mongolian Mauler.
That guy, what's his name?
I don't know, but he, no one had ever seen him or heard of him, and he had ads for autographed pictures. He was in Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
The guy with the black contact lenses.
Yes. Who I think had a cup of coffee in Smoky Mountain Wrestling as well.
And in WCW briefly, too.
Oh, yeah. That's right. 93, right?
No, I think it was... I mean, it aired in 94. He had this... He was one of those guys who would only show up on the Orlando tapings. And he had a feud with Brian Pillman that only aired on Worldwide.
Wow, really? I didn't know that.
Well, WCW had all those weird feuds where they'd have programs that were only on certain shows for some reason. And then if it was only on Pro, you might get screwed out of it, because if it was a Freebirds feud and you lived in New York or Chicago or got Pro via the superstations out of New York or Chicago, you wouldn't see it because it tied into them hosting the show, and because they didn't host the New York Chicago versions, you wouldn't see it.
Huh.
So anyway, yes, the Mongolian Stomper. So where were we before you started talking about the Mongolian Mauler?
Well, I was just asking about your first memories. Do you remember the first time? Because I know you're a real big buff on Calgary. Yeah. When was the first time you saw Mongolian Stomper or the Stomper, Archie Gouldie, I should say, in Stampede Wrestling?
It would probably be whatever was on those Best of Stampede Wrestling tapes that the Hearts put out in the 90s.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I know there's that Dan Croffett match from very early 70s when they were still in black and white.
Black and white. Yep, that's right.
I don't think the Bad News angle is on there.
I'm definitely not on the first one. I don't know about any of the other ones. I don't think it was, though.
Okay.
I mean, how do you put that on here? Here's the angle that almost destroyed everything.
Well, they would edit out the Ed Whalen quitting from a lot of the times they showed it in later years. I'm just trying to think. That you mentioned that Kevin Sullivan feud in Smoky Mountain. You watched the match I sent you the other day, right?
Oh, yeah, before you had even sent it to me. Okay. Dave Lane had sent it to me.
Okay. It's from Fan Week 93, and this one I believe was Morristown, Tennessee, right?
Not sure. May have been.
It's Mongolian Stomper against Kevin Sullivan it's a big gym, but it's not Knoxville or Johnson City, and it's a great brawl, and really
oh yeah.
I watched it the morning after. I asked Dave Meltzer because Dave said at Fan Week he saw them have a very similar match, and was just amazed by the fans running from the Stomper and terror and all that. He said it was a different match that weekend, but very similar. And this is just a really good brawl. I mean, as much as there's other stuff closer to his prime, I think as far as the Mongolian Stomper character, I think this sums up what made him unique the best, at least as a wrestling performer, as opposed to just his general persona, standing there looking scary.
Yeah, and you're right. It was Morristown, Tennessee.
And that's on Ron Head's YouTube channel, which I believe is Blade Rope. That's right.
And you seek this out.
I was hoping you'd do the accent.
Did I do an accent last time?
You did a Regal impression last time.
Hold on. The Blade Rope, and you seek this out.
Very good.
I don't remember how I did it.
It was close enough to that.
I could do a wacky Cockney accent. I can't really do a distinguished British accent, or I could do the old, the stuffy British. I could do that.
But yeah, that's on Ron Head's YouTube channel because he was there, and he follows that whole match. It goes outside the building. He follows them back in. He follows them everywhere. His camera work really adds a lot to it. It's the closest thing I could compare it to in that sense is Bob Barnett's video of the Onita and Hijo del Santo 6-man tag from Los Angeles.
LA 91, right?
Yes, we're 92, I think.
92. Right.
But if you've ever seen, there's also a home video version of that FMW shot, and it's nowhere near as good as Bob's. Because they have their multiple cameras and they have to divide it up. But Bob's up in the stands, and he's got this perfect shot of, Onita and Goto brawling with, who was it, Horace Boulder and Tim Patterson?
Yeah, I think so.
Brawling in the stands as Santo and Negro Casas are doing the most beautiful lucha libre you'll ever see in the ring. And this is similar, that it's I would not want to see any version of this match other than this one that Ron Head shot.
Yeah, see, I remember the version from Thanksgiving Thunder, I believe, or maybe not Thanksgiving Thunder, maybe Christmas Chaos in 92, which was from Johnson City, and it wasn't as good as this one. Plus, it was a little darker when they went around the building because it was a dark building. And this version is much better. And obviously, for those of you interested in seeing it, it will be in our video playlist this week, done every week by the great Alan Blackstock over in England. We're very appreciative of all the work he's done putting these playlists together each and every week. And it will be linked on our Twitter page as well as in the 605pod.com listing for this episode. Right. But so we really wanted to talk about the Stomper this week. And when you talk about the Stomper, you really have to talk about two sides of him. You have to talk about the Mongolian Stomper, the scary, mute, most of the time mute, character who terrorized the southeast portion of the United States. And I guess you could say southwest too, because he was in San Antonio. But then there's Archie the Stomper Gouldie, who was one of the biggest stars in Calgary for Stampede Wrestling. Maybe, my argument was, and you'll hear it coming up here, he was the biggest non-Hart star in the territory. Not necessarily on a worldwide basis, but in the territory itself, other than the Harts, he was the biggest name there. And when we
also,
decided...
just as scary as the Mongolian Stomper, just in a completely different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the really interesting thing. The Stomper didn't talk, or Mongolian Stomper didn't talk, Stomper Archie Gouldie talked, and he was very scary, very believable. And we decided that to really appreciate the career of the Mongolian Stomper and to cover it, we wanted to talk to a few people. So first, Bix and I spoke with Heath McCoy, who put out the fantastic book, Pain and Passion, The History of Stampede Wrestling. It's available everywhere. One of the best wrestling books ever. I think you'll agree, Bix. It's a phenomenal book. And here's the conversation we had with him about the legacy of Archie the Stomper Gouldie in Calgary. There's such an interesting dichotomy that exists between the major star that the Mongolian Stomper was in the southeastern part of the United States with the major star that the Stomper Archie Gouldie was in Calgary and Stampede Wrestling. And joining us right now is Heath McCoy, the author of Pain and Passion, The History of Stampede Wrestling, one of the very best books ever written about professional wrestling. Really a book I love. It's available at Amazon.com and bookstores all over the place. Heath, how are you today?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
So when I mention Archie Gouldie, the Stomper, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
He's an icon of Canadian wrestling, specifically Western Canadian wrestling, in the Stampede Wrestling territory. He is arguably the greatest heel that Stampede Wrestling ever produced. And we're talking, when you're looking at some of the great Stampede Wrestling heels, we're talking about the Dynamite Kid, we're talking about Abdul the Butcher, we're talking about Killer Kowalski. He was, Bad News Allen was such a major heel here. Archie the Stomper Gouldie was perhaps the greatest heel, arguably the greatest heel that ever came out of Stampede Wrestling. He was the Godzilla of this territory.
Well, he started in 1962 and was working primarily or only in preliminary matches. And then he went to Kansas City, where he became the Mongolian Stomper. And then he came back in, I want to say, 67 as the Stomper. Obviously, major difference between what he was on the cards in 62 and what he was in 67. Did the fans instantly take to the Stomper when he returned?
When he returned, yes, because it's funny. Yeah, he was kind of treated in the early 60s there as a preliminary guy. He was an undercard guy. And he had to go make his name as the Mongolian Stomper. And then he came back in the late 60s. And, he'd probably fully developed, came back more fully developed as a pro wrestler, had more of a presence, I imagine, as well. And then Stu gave him the big push in the late 60s there, and he actually helped revive the Stampede Wrestling territory. Stampede Wrestling had been going since the late 40s, but they really hit a really bad patch by the early mid to early 60s there. They were going through a tough time. I believe they stopped the business at one point there. The promotion ended for a short time. They switched TV stations. They changed names at one point. They were Wildcat Wrestling at one point there. And when they finally became Stampede Wrestling, and really got that momentum going, Archie the Stomper Gouldie was the key heel, and he was the guy that kind of got the fans excited and scared again of this monster heel in the territory. And he was a key guy in reviving the territory at that point.
Yeah, I recall from Bret Hart's book, things were bad. That's the period that Bret talks about in his book where the kids barely had clothes in the Hart family and all that. The line that always sticks out in my mind is that they were too poor for real pants.
Yeah, they were impoverished, yes. Yeah,
it's just a weird, and, just especially, it was just such a weird dynamic because I think it was when the promotion was still existing, but they got made fun of even more because everyone thought they should have money. So, it was a hard time. And but then, like we're saying, Stomper comes in, pops the territory.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that he was established as the Mongolian Stomper, and then rather than bring him in as the Mongolian Stomper in Stampede, they made him this. They brought him back as a full-on. He had the cowboy boots, and he was a full-on Alberta, Canada monster of heel at that point. He had the cowboy boots. He was Archie the Stomper. He was from Carbon, the small dairy farm town, Carbon, Alberta, and they really played up the Alberta angle. And interestingly enough, because I believe as the Mongolian Stomper, with a few exceptions, I believe he was a mute sort of thing.
Yep.
with that heel, with that whole angle. But when they brought him, he was actually he cut great promos, great intense, scary promos, and they really played that up. They allowed him to run with that as well when he came in as Archie the Stomper, and not only was his in ring presence so powerful, but he also had this simmering, angry, and explosive intensity about the promos he cut, and that was part of the thing as well that drew fans to him.
Yeah, it's one of the things that Bix always talks about is that even though he was this mute character who had managers always do his interviews everywhere he went in the United States, he was an incredibly strong talker in Stampede.
Absolutely. If you look at the clips, there was a really famous sort of angle that went absolutely out of control in the early '80s, where he was a tag team partner with Bad News Allen, and then there was a whole thing where he turned on Bad News Allen. Bad News Allen turned on him, and it was he had there was a kind of a fake son that they brought in, Jeff Gouldie, that was in the ring with him, and Bad News Allen. It was a whole angle where Bad News Allen crippled his son, and it was this big backstab in the ring sort of thing, and it was pulled off so well. The big announcer here in town, here in Calgary, Ed Whalen, left the show. The media went crazy. Like it was just pulled. Like Bruce Hart described it Bret Hart's brother Bruce Hart described it as a War of the Worlds sort of moment, like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, where it was just carried off so beautifully that everybody believed it. And the media went into this frenzy, and the Boxing and Wrestling Commission took away Stu's license for a time and everything. And part of it was just carried off so beautifully, and a lot of that had to do with Archie Gouldie's. He came into the ring after his son had supposedly been crippled, and instead of ranting and raving and shouting at the camera like he usually did, it was just a one-on-one interview with him and Ed Whalen, and he was so somber and saddened that his son had been crippled, and it just, everybody bought it. I think I was 13 years old at the time watching it, and I remember I couldn't believe that this had happened. I called my grandpa up. My grandpa was watching at the time. We were like, I can't believe that happened. And everybody just, everybody fully bought it. And Stu lost his license for a period there, and they had to carry on their cards outside of Calgary at various Indian reservations, and it sort of turned into this big. It didn't go as well as they wanted it to. It kind of backfired on them, and it actually hurt the promotion, and actually made them weakened them a little bit when WWF was knocking on the door and trying to take over the territory. But the effectiveness of that moment, so much of it had to do with the way Archie Gouldie sold it, as well as Bad News Allen.
That match is pretty famous. I think it was December 2nd, 1983. It was Bret Hart, Davey Boy Smith, and Sonny Two Rivers against Archie Gouldie, the fake son Jeff Gouldie, who later became Tommy Lane of the Rock and Roll RPM.
Right.
and Bad News Allen. And, a couple of things stick out in my mind about that. One is, and I've never heard anyone say this on a mic anywhere else, after it happens and Ed Whalen's interviewing Bad News, he says, I hope the son of a gun dies, which is just over the top for professional wrestling even. And, you mentioned how so much of what happened after that, what transpired, was caused by just, you're so used to seeing a ranting and raving Stomper, and now you're seeing him very calmly explain how he's feeling in this moment, seeing his son crippled. The other thing is Ed Whalen's reaction. How much do you think Ed Whalen's reaction, his draping the microphone over the top rope and walking out, how much did that lead to all the problems that happened?
And it should be made clear, by the way, he doesn't just drape the mic over the ropes and walk out. He outright says on the air he's quitting. And he did. Right. He legitimately quit.
Yeah, because he actually, they actually, it's funny because, I mean, Ed Whalen was obviously an insider in the whole thing. He knew it was a work, but they didn't, Bruce Hart didn't, who orchestrated the whole thing, didn't let him in on what was happening. And Ed Whalen, you know, he bought it to the extent that he quit, or either he bought it or he thought that it was too over the top and he didn't want to be a part of this on TV anymore. But regardless, he quit. And Ed Whalen was a hugely influential, you know, figure, because he was not only the Stampede, the voice of Stampede Wrestling, but he was a legitimate newscaster and you know, sportscaster. He used to do Calgary Flames games and whatnot. So he was a legitimate, you know, personality here in Western Canada. So when he did that, you know, when he sold it, yeah, that really did bring over the top. I think if Ed hadn't done that, the media probably wouldn't have freaked out to the extent they did, and it wouldn't have, you know, and then the Boxing and Wrestling Commission wouldn't have freaked out, and it wouldn't have created all these problems. But yeah, it really was. It was that Orson Welles War of the Worlds angle that just went over so well that everybody bought it hook, line, and sinker, and that had to do with the performance of Archie Gouldie, and it had to do with also the performance of Bad News Allen, which you're saying I helped him to die in the ring. It really took it over the top. I can't watch that enough times. It's so, not only is it a great childhood memory for me, but it's just such a powerful, over the top, out of control moment.
And Calgary, I mean, Stampede, they didn't necessarily do a lot of those like heavy heat angles like territories, especially like in the southern U.S. would do. I mean, they, especially in that era, you know, with Dynamite Kid as the top heel in the mid-heavyweight division, I mean, you didn't have as much of that. It was a lot of, like, longer programs, maybe a little more wrestling-centric. I mean, you always had your top heels like Bad News and Abdullah and Stomper coming in and out. But, I mean, but they weren't as much about that type of angle. So it's even more shocking in the context of Stampede Wrestling than it would be somewhere else.
Yeah, I think I agree with that to a certain extent. Yeah, it was kind of a brilliant thing that they were doing because, I mean, you know, Stomper had come back into the territory, and he was the fearsome heel of the late 60s, early 70s, you know, and he had been away for a while, and they brought him back in. Then they were selling Bad News Allen as the fearsome, terrifying heel of, you know, the early 80s. And so to pit those two against each other, it was, you can see what a great inspiration it was. But you know, it was just too. I mean, probably not including Ed Whalen in what they were doing. That was probably a big mistake in hindsight.
And it certainly wasn't the only time that Ed Whalen sabotaged an angle on television.
No, it's true. Ed Whalen, he had a kind of a love-hate relationship with the whole thing. He loved being part of Stampede Wrestling, but he was quite conservative in a lot of ways, and he didn't like things to go over the top. He didn't like things to get too bloody. He sometimes edited out the best parts. He insisted that the best parts of matches be edited out so they never appeared on TV and that sort of thing, because he really didn't want things to get too over the top. So yeah.
And the really kind of unfortunate part about all that is just on top of how it would have been watching at home, you know, as it was going on, because Stampede shot everything live to tape, if it didn't air on TV, most of the time it wasn't even shot.
Yeah, that's true. Man. That's true as well, yeah. But yeah, the Stompers, there's a really interesting, I mean, it's kind of interesting how the Stomper, I noticed that there's a lot of reports right now about Archie Gouldie, and some of them are suggesting that he died at the age of 71. And I just wanted to point out, I don't think that's accurate. It doesn't quite jive with my records. And Mike Mooneyham at the Post and Courier in South Carolina said he was 78. And
that's what we're hearing.
Yeah, I think that jives up a lot more with what I've, because on my timeline, he comes, you know, Archie Gouldie first appears, you know, he storms the ring at a Stampede Wrestling match at one point there. He's a young guy, and he's a football player, and he wants to get into the ring, and he basically stormed the ring when the Mills brothers were fighting one night, and he tried to get in the ring and fight them, and basically the security threw him out and everything, and then he tried again to do it, and Stu took him aside and he said, I want to be a wrestler, and Stu kind of brought him to the. Stu said, if you want to do this, then, come to the dungeon and we'll try you out as a wrestler. And then Stu did he did the thing that Stu did, where he would torture. He made Archie Gouldie suffer that day, and Archie came back. But when you look at the timeline, I think that happened in the late 50s, and if he was 71, he would have been like a 14-year-old kid at the time. Whereas if it was, it makes more sense that he was 78. I think that he was, because then he would have been about 19, 20 years old when he first came to Stu. But he was, Stu sort of taught him a lesson there down in the dungeon, and really was hard on the guy. And Archie just kept coming back, and he kept coming back, and he kept coming back, and then eventually Stu made him a wrestler. And he was a preliminary guy for the early 60s there. He couldn't get past that, so then he went away, had success in the South, and then came back as this reinvented monster heel, Archie the Stomper Gouldie, in the late 60s.
It seems that Calgary, and when I think about it, usually I think of the Harts and the Hart various son-in-laws, brother-in-laws, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
But when you really think about it, it really was a territory driven by strong heels, because the Stomper picks business up in 67. He ends up leaving in July of 69 for something we'll talk about shortly, an incident with Billy Robinson where he finally gets fed up and walks out. And then business goes down. Business is really bad until, I was about to say Fritz, excuse me, until Stu brings in Abdullah the Butcher. And then business picks up again, and now you have, this dream match between Abdullah and the Stomper.
Yeah, which I mean, what you can't, the pictures from that era and everything. It's just intense. You can't have two bigger monster heels facing off with each other than those two as well. And it's true. It really very much was a. I mean, I think to extent all the territories are heel driven though, right? You need a great monster heel to really get over the. The baby faces, the Hearts being the baby faces in that territory. But I mean, the same thing happened, and then you had a real lull in the kind of mid 70s. There, they were almost done at one point there, and then the Dynamite Kid came in and breathed that bit of fresh air into everything. And he came in as not so much the monster heel, but he was doing stuff that nobody had ever seen.
The Stomper Abdullah match in 71, I believe, was the biggest gate up until that time that Stampede had ever drawn. So it was a really big money feud, and you can imagine that the fans it was a dream match, just these two monsters getting in there with each other. One of the other feuds that is incredibly memorable of the Stompers up in Stampede was the one with Dan Crawford, including where he was the mass destroyer to trick him into getting into a match.
Yeah, that's right. You've reminded me of that. I forgot about that. He came to the ring and Crawford came to the ring in a mask, right? And took on the Stomper that way, and then tore off his mask. And I believe I might be getting some of that wrong. I totally forgot about that angle until just now. But yeah, that was also a great moment. Yeah.
Now that I think about it,
Crawford, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, Dan Crawford was just he's sort of underappreciated guy. He was a real great mind. Him and Torquemada did the earliest ladder match and everything, which was Dan Crawford's innovation as well. And Stomper really loved working with Dan Crawford, because Dan Crawford was, I think he used to call him a thinking man's wrestler. He always had the bigger angle in mind, and he had the bigger picture in mind, sort of thing. So yeah.
What I was gonna say was, now that I think about it, I mean, because that was early 70s, that's probably like, 71, 72, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
I'm trying to think if the whole, babyface isn't getting a title shot, wears a mask, comes in as, the masked whatever, and tricks the heel into giving him a title shot thing. I'm trying to figure out if that ever happened before that angle on Stampede. There's so many things that Stampede Wrestling was sort of innovated and came up. I think maybe did first. It's hard to say in the wrestling world who came up with what first, right? Because there's so many territories, and and some of it's documented and better than in other places. But I mean, you might be right. that whole mask thing there, and pulling one over on the fans and driving everybody's excitement up like that. Yeah, that might have been the first. I hate to go on the record and say that just in case it wasn't. But yeah, yeah.
Well, we briefly mentioned the July 1969 incident with Billy Robinson, who Archie Gouldie had been wrestling for the better part of a week before he finally blew his top. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, Billy Robinson, the angle, I believe what the angle was supposed to be, Robinson and the Stomper were going around the Stampede circuit there, and they were gonna, they were having matches back and forth, and Dory Funk Jr. every year. In the Stampede Wrestling, it was the big thing every year was when the Calgary Stampede was in town. That was the big moment for Stampede Wrestling. It was in July when the Calgary Stampede comes to town, and they'd have matches in the corral, and Stu would always bring in the world champion or Andre the Giant or one of the big top draws in the world at that time. And so what was going to happen, they were bringing in, I believe it was Dory Funk Jr., who was the world champion at the time, and it was supposed to be Stomper coming out ahead, and he was going to take on Dory Funk Jr., which would have been a huge deal. But he was going back and forth with Billy Robinson, and Billy Robinson was notoriously could be a difficult guy to work with.
Yeah.
And we all know. And he wouldn't. He was arrogant, and he worked stiff. He wouldn't sell for the Stomper. He wouldn't. He did that to a lot of people. But Archie Gouldie's not the guy you do that with. And they did that a couple times on the circuit. They were having some issues with that. And what happened? Stomper just stormed out of the ring one night. I'm not sure if it was in Calgary or Edmonton or Regina or where it was, but he stormed out of the ring one night. Went back to the dressing room, threw his boots up against the wall supposedly, and he says, "Hell with it, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this." And he left. And so Billy Robinson wound up having these epic matches with Dory Funk Jr. instead because Stomper left the territory. And I think he left for, I'm not sure the exact timeline of it right now, but he left, and he did leave the territory for a while after that point.
I think it was around a year and a half, because I don't think he came back until the feud with Abdullah.
Until the Abdullah stuff. I think you're right about that, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, one of the things you point out in your book, once again, Pain and Passion, a fantastic book, I really love it, is that sometimes Archie Gouldie was a little frustrated because he was someone who was very prompt, on time, professional, and that wasn't necessarily the way that the Hart family did things.
That is not in any way the way the Hart family does things. The Hart family, they were always, I think behind on the paychecks, and the show was always running a little bit late. I don't know how they pulled off a TV show all those years, because you had, you have to have certain things delivered on time. I think they ran a little bit tighter of a ship in the 70s, and then it got more out of control later on when the kids were more taking it over. But I think there was always this sort of level of disorganization within the Stampede Wrestling world, sort of thing. Yeah, and he supposedly used to drive Archie Gouldie crazy. He was always a guy that had he was right on time. He always had he always had the neat bag, and everything was packed just right. And he was quite a health food, quite into his health and that kind of stuff. He didn't really do a lot of the partying on the sides or anything like that. But yeah, he couldn't stand the disorganization of the whole thing, and he used to get very frustrated. There's one story that I just love. It sort of reminds me of this because he would go and collect his paycheck at the Hart House, and he cut such a terrifying, and it speaks to what a terrifying heel he was. I guess he had cut such a terrifying promo at one point there. I'm not sure if it would have been the late 60s or the early 70s, but he cut this terrifying promo where he said he was going to cripple. I think he said he was going to cripple Stu Hart, he was going to kill Stu Hart, and he was going to come to the Hart House, and he was going to take Stu's wife Helen Hart, and he was going to give her a pile driver out on the street or something. And Bret Hart, who was like 10 or 11 years old, and wasn't clued into what the business was all about. Like, they all believed that their dad, that this was all real. They were, and they kind of the kids all just discovered it as they grew up, the truth about it. But Bret Hart watched this on TV, and he watched this monster threatening to do this to his mother, and he was terrified. And I guess so one morning, on Saturday or Sunday morning or whatever, the Stomper comes to Hart House to collect his paycheck, and Bret, this guy had just been raging on TV about what he was going to do to the Hart family, and he came in, and Bret was so terrified he went and hid under the hid under the kitchen table or something, and then he watched his mom give Stomper a darling, give him a bit, with his New York accent, and give him a big hug, and then he kind of clued into what was really maybe going on with the family business at that point there. But he was just terrified to have the Stomper show up at his front door. I always find that a great sort of funny story, and it speaks to how terrifying and what a great promo the Stomper would deliver as well, and also how terrifying and devastating he could be in the ring as this intimidating, powerful presence.
And it's also amazing just to show how terrifying he could be because both of his gimmicks, personas, however you want to put it, as a heel, whether it's Archie the Stomper, Mongolian Stomper, both were terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny to me that they were so different. Like I'm surprised that they didn't bring him in. The Hearts didn't bring him in just as with a continuation of the Mongolian Stomper thing. But I'm glad they didn't because as Archie the Stomper Gouldie, he really fit into that sort of, there was a distinctly Alberta flavor to Stampede Wrestling, and this is sort of a, it's a cowboy community, and there's oil here and that kind of stuff, and we've got our rodeo, and which we're known for and everything, and by making him Archie the Stomper Gouldie with the cowboy boots and the boy from Carbon sort of thing, the tough guy from Carbon, Alberta, they sort of yeah, it made it very Alberta-centric and very special to Stampede Wrestling, which is part of the reason he's such an icon here. Whereas he would have been just, I don't think he would have just been another heel because he was such a powerful heel. But it wouldn't have been as memorable, I think, for this territory if they'd brought him in just as the Mongolian Stomper, which they easily could have done. That was obviously a great angle and something that worked everywhere in the world, right?
Yeah, Heath, I'm curious. Talking about this, when was the first time you actually saw Archie the Stomper as the Mongolian Stomper?
Oh, you know what? I've not nearly enough. It's just clips. Thank goodness for YouTube and that sort of thing, And I've read the magazine articles about the Mongolian Stomper, and I did my research. But yeah, I would love to see more. If you guys can point me in the direction of some great Mongolian Stomper stuff to seek out, I would love to have a look at it. Actually,
we will. And what's your earliest memory of the Stomper as a fan?
Well, definitely it was him coming into because I wasn't, I was too much of a kid in the 70s and I wasn't even born yet in the late 60s, and I was, just the infant or whatever when he was doing his thing in the early 70s. So for me, the big memory for me was when he came in the 80s and they brought him in to initially to fight the Hearts and to be the monster bad guy, but eventually they were setting it up so he was going to have this big explosive confrontation with Bad News Allen. But that for me, that's my era. Like I grew up watching it in the early 80s, so my era was the Dynamite Kid era and the Bad News Allen era and that sort of thing. And so suddenly this guy comes in, this name from the past came in for me. Archie the Stomper was this, he was the old guy. He was the name from the past that they brought in. He was the bad guy from, the heel from yesteryear sort of thing, and they brought him in. And that was my first experience with Archie Gouldie.
When you were researching your book, did you get to talk much with the Stomper?
Yeah, I did. I got to say, it was a bit of a disappointing interview. Bob Leonard, who's the Stampede Wrestling photographer, who's amazing, and he just passed away recently too, which is funny because him and Archie were such great friends. But yeah, Bob Leonard hooked me up with an interview with Archie Gouldie, and he was where was it? It was it's where he was working as a sheriff or something like that. I can't remember the name of where it was, Fort Knox or something.
Knox County. Knox County. Yeah.
Pardon me?
Knox County.
Is that what it was? Yeah, Knox County, right. And so I had a little bit of an interview with him then, but it wasn't a great interview. It was hard to get a lot out of him because he really was a child. You could tell he was a product of the kayfabe era. He wasn't about talking, at least for me, he wasn't about talking to he wasn't into talking to any sort of journalist that wanted to dig dirt and find the behind the scenes stories, and even somebody he didn't obviously had issues with, like Billy Robinson. He didn't have anything really any great revelations for me about how he really felt about Billy Robinson or how he really felt about Bad News Allen or the Hearts or anything like that. It was an okay interview, but I didn't, good for a couple quotes, but I didn't get a heck of a lot. Everything I got from the Stomper came from, the people around the Stomper that were willing to share stories about the Stomper, like Bob Leonard and, Leo Burke and just, Bret Hart and people like that. Dan Crawford, had great stories about the Stomper.
What was the consensus about him? Did guys enjoy working with him?
Yes, I would say yes. I think that you'd heard the odd thing that he could be temperamental, that he could be a difficult guy to work with if you kind of made him mad. Things had to be just a certain way for him in a lot of ways, I think. But no, everybody considered him like one of the great heels. Everybody considered him consummate professional. And just this great, terrifying presence, and I think everybody respected the kind of guy he was in the ring, and the way he conducted himself in a business way too.
Would you say it's fair to say that he was the biggest non-Hart star in the Stampede territory?
Did you say the biggest non-Hart star?
Yeah, in the history of the territory.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, because if you look at, I always think about the Dynamite Kid. Mm-hmm. If you look at what a star he became, a lot of ways, and maybe I sometimes, who was it? I think Dan Crawford wrote something about Archie, a couple days after he passed, and he said he wasn't a big enough star, and I do believe that that's true, that he wasn't a big enough star. I think he made his impact in certain territories, but I just feel like he doesn't have that over the top recognition all across the wrestling world that he should have, maybe. So even though he did make a huge impact here, I wouldn't say he was, the biggest non-Hart star necessarily.
And that does kind of make sense, because it is a territory where so many guys did become big international stars, but they kind of stuck around locally too. Like a lot of them still lived in the city and stuff, like the Hearts, like Davey, like Dynamite, until he left for England in the early '90s. Yeah. That to a degree, it wouldn't necessarily stick out. People like that, or like I guess the people who didn't become as big international stars. Yeah,
I'm even thinking like. Like people, somebody like, it's actually a lot of major stars passed through this territory that they went on to become bigger stars. They weren't so big when they were here, but then they became so much bigger later. I'm talking about, superstar Billy Graham and Jake the Snake Roberts and Junkyard Dog. I mean, they all have a bigger impact, internationally on the pop culture consciousness sort of thing than the Stomper did. So I would definitely think that he wasn't definitely not the biggest non-Hart star, and that's too bad, because I think that he deserved to be. Like when the lists come out of the great, the 100 greatest wrestlers of all time, I'd be surprised to see Archie on that list, but I think Archie belongs on that list.
But within a Stampede context, though, would you put him up there?
Yeah.
My gosh! In a Stampede context, he would be
as the biggest non-Hart star, or him or Dynamite, but I guess.
Yeah, I think let me think here. Yes, I would think so. Yes, okay. In terms of the impact he made in his time, it's too bad, because right now I think that. It's sort of forgotten. If you didn't grow up in that era, there's a whole generation of wrestling fans now who would, even here in Calgary, who would have no idea who Archie Gouldie was, and it's such a shame, because he deserves to be one of those legendary guys that anybody who's even remotely acquainted with the business should know.
Yeah, there was Bix, correct me if I'm wrong. It was an episode of Legends Roundtable, I believe, that had Bret Hart and Pat Patterson as two of the speakers. I
remember it was about wrestling in Canada. Yeah, and I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, it was about wrestling in Canada, and whoever the moderator was, maybe Mean Gene or
it was Okerlund. Yeah.
Asked Bret, who do you think was the biggest Canadian wrestling star? And Bret said, well, you got to put the Stomper Archie Gouldie on the list. And Pat Patterson almost dismissed, well, not even almost, he dismissed it. He thought it was a ridiculous notion that Archie the Stomper Gouldie would be high on a list of greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time.
Well, yeah, I think that's a territorial thing, right? I mean, here, because Pat wasn't familiar with, he wasn't ingrained in the Western Canadian tradition. But I mean, yeah, from a Stampede Wrestling perspective, yeah, Stomper was. I absolutely agree with Brett that Stomper should be, right at the top of that list.
How much coverage has his passing received in the newspapers up there?
It's kind of gone unnoticed.
Really?
Yeah, and unless there's something I'm missing, and I feel bad. I should be writing something about it, but I don't really. I'm not with the newspapers anymore. I've sort of moved on from that world, so I'm not doing it. I thought that I should be pitching them something, or that he should be on there, and I've got to. It's because of the issues in my life right now, it's hard for me to do that. But yeah, it's kind of gone unnoticed, and it's a real shame because, and even on the internet, like I was doing an internet search, and Mike Mooniam did the piece in the Post and Courier there, but I'm not seeing, other than wrestling websites and stuff like that, I'm not seeing a lot of mainstream coverage, even from and maybe I'm just missing it, but even from the territories where he was the Mongolian Stomper. And I feel it's a real shame, and it's a real shame here in Calgary that he's not getting some sort of coverage, because he was so impactful in this territory. But I just think that that institutional knowledge is gone, and there's a lot of people that just don't know. And Stampede Wrestling is everyone kind of here, wrestling fans here, that the kids today that they watch the WWE, they're familiar with Stampede Wrestling and the tradition of Stampede Wrestling, but they're not familiar enough with it that they would know, Beyond the Hearts and the people like that. They wouldn't know about somebody like Archie Gouldie, and it's a real shame.
And I mean, I would even say that I guess it's possible that Bob Leonard passing kind of could also play a hand in that, because I mean, he was the go-to guy for a lot of people as far as Stampede Wrestling history, I would think, both locally as well as within wrestling writer circles and all that.
Oh yeah, very much so, very much so. I was glad when Dan Crawford wrote his little piece for the Slam Wrestling site, because that was a nice tribute to Archie. But yeah, there should be. He deserves more, for certain. Yeah, it's tough. Part of it, I think, is he's sort of fallen victim to what's going on in the newspaper industry right now as well. Whereas newspapers are, I don't know if it's as bad in the States. I think it is, but newspapers are kind of dying. Are kind of dying here, right? So you've got less guys that are around. There's less freelance money to do those kind of stories, and it's an example of these major, heritage stories that are sort of slipping through the cracks because newspapers just don't have the resources to do that sort of thing anymore. But it's a real loss.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it should be, the day the Stomper died should be on the A1 of the Calgary Herald. But I mean, there's not enough people to know who he is if that's going to happen. But yeah.
Well, it's a real shame, but that's one of the reasons why Bix and I are doing this show here today, is just to make sure that people know a little bit more than they did about the career.
I'm really glad that you are. Thank you. I'm glad that you are.
Yeah. Well, the book is Pain and Passion, The History of Stampede Wrestling. The author, Heath McCoy. Heath, thank you so much for joining us today, and we really appreciate the time you've given us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on.
So yeah, that was Heath McCoy, author of Pain and Passion, The History of Stampede Wrestling, talking about the Stampede Wrestling career of Stomper Archie Gouldie. And it was kind of sad to hear that there really hasn't been much newspaper coverage in Calgary or elsewhere in Alberta about his passing. I mean, you would kind of expect it, but we talked about with Heath, it's not something that that they necessarily have the resources for people who would be aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, when we decided to try to get Heath on the program here right after we heard the news, he actually hadn't heard the news yet because no one up there was covering it. We broke the news to him about Archie Gouldie's passing. And it is sad because, again, he is a native son of Alberta, and he was a major star from them from 67 to 83. And, nothing. That's very, very sad to hear that.
Yeah, and it's, he wasn't a big star in Japan, but when you really look as far as like just international stardom, But he did go to Australia at its peak. And that was as good as going to Japan. I mean, that's...
Well, I had just found that tape that I sent you, and we'll have this in a video playlist as well, of from a newsreel from Australia. It's the Stomper and Ray Stevens, prime Ray Stevens, against Buddy Austin and Killer Kowalski. And maybe prime Killer Kowalski, too, before the wig, where he looks great in there. And it's the Stomper that, I don't think there's much footage of him when he actually did shave his head, so that it was just like a little black ponytail at the top, and he had the Fu Manchu.
Right, when he's more of the stereotypical pro wrestling Mongolian look.
Right.
But
how many Mongolians were there before? Like, did the Mongols popped up in the what? I know they were champions in '71, but were they there in the late '60s already?
I think so.
Okay. I just wonder, the fake Mongols, how many, what was around before Archie Gouldie?
And of course, there were also the Manchurians.
That's right.
Who weren't from Mongolia, but they kind of did the same gimmick.
And Gorilla Monsoon's finishing maneuver was the Manchurian landslide.
Well, he was supposed to be from Manchuria.
Yeah.
Originally, which I don't know how you take this big Italian dude and say he's from Manchuria. It was, what was it? It was Wild Red Berry, I think, found him in a bathing nude in a spring on a trip to Manchuria.
Yeah.
That's what wrestling doesn't have anymore.
Well, going back to the Stomper story, there was one thing we briefly talked about there. I definitely wanted you to jump in because I know you know about this stuff better than I do. But we talked about Ed Whalen, power over the program, his status in the culture up there. But Ed Whalen, if he didn't like something, would just edit it off the show. And it's famous for what happened here and the controversy that really blew way out of proportion because Ed Whalen quit on the air, made things a lot worse than it would have been. But, of course, I think the other famous one, Bix, is Ed Whalen's role in the breakup of the British Bulldogs when they returned in 1989.
Yeah, now he would edit stuff on the show pretty regularly, but usually it was violence, so it's sort of... Yeah, he had his whole thing where he liked wrestling as this sort of funny ha-ha type of thing, which, that's part of the whole problem with him, and that he would no-sell the heels and all that. But then his... stuff that he loved were the mid-heavyweights, as they called them. So Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy and Bruce Hart and the Japanese guys and all of them. So, of course, his favorite tag team's the British Bulldogs. So the British Bulldogs come back after they leave WWF, and they go back to Calgary because that's where they're living anyway, so they're working Stampede between all Japan tours. And the promotion's kind of dying. They decide I guess it was Stu, because I'm sure Bruce was not a fan of this, makes Dynamite the booker, and Dynamite decides to split up the Bulldogs. Ed Whalen was not happy. Ed Whalen decided he didn't edit the whole thing off TV, but he made it kind of incomprehensible. And I don't know, I don't know the specifics of, if there were what certain things he did or didn't edit off TV, but he was just angry that his favorite team broke up, and he edited a lot of it off TV. What? Okay. Good for you. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever seen the original taking of Pelham 123?
Oh, yeah, years ago. Sure.
Is it me, or does the iconic, late 70s into 80s version of Ed Whalen look exactly like the hijackers in the original taking of Pelham 123?
As you started saying that, I realized where you were going. I guess you could say that. Sure.
Because have you ever seen original version Ed Whalen?
Yeah. Before the mustache?
Before the mustache and the wig.
Yes. The wig, that's right. Oh, we got to add him to our list of wrestlers and wrestling personalities with wigs.
I just don't get, why are you going to do that when everyone knows what you look like without it?
Well, I think the whole thing with wigs is you kind of delude yourself into thinking that no one will notice.
That he went from almost completely bald to...
Killer Kowalski. Killer Kowalski went from losing his hair to all of a sudden look like one of the Beatles.
But Killer Kowalski was not as bald as Ed Whalen.
No, that's true.
Killer Kowalski had a working amount of hair.
I guess, maybe for the next episode is one of the things we could work on. Not only who wore wigs, but who went from being the baldest to having hair. Kind of like a reverse battle royal. Who started the baldest and ended up with the most hair? But
I'm going to hold myself back from saying anything about Ric Flair, except I just did.
That wasn't subtle at all.
That's not what I meant either. I was trying to.
No hair, no flair. I got it.
I got it. Yeah, that was clumsy. That was Shockmaster-esque.
Bix. So listen, we talked to Heath about the Stampede run of Archie Gouldie, and then we thought we should really focus on just what a memorable run he had in Tennessee, and not just Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. He was all over the place. And we spoke to our in-house expert on Southern wrestling, the great Beau James, the king of Kingsport, kingofkingsport.com. Follow him on Twitter. And we talked with him. We had a really good discussion about the Mongolian Stomper's place in Southern wrestling history.
All right, we are back, and as promised, we are joined by the king of Kingsport and one of, if not the finest historians on Southeastern wrestling in general. Well, both Southeastern and literally Southeastern in general, but also the territory known as Southeastern, the one and only Beau James.
Well, thanks for having me. I wish it was under better circumstances this time.
Yeah. I mean, but I'm glad to have you on, just, because like you were telling us before we started recording, you knew him well and you know all the history. So, I mean, few better people to have on to talk about the Stomper than you. And before like Brian gets going with what he was going to ask, I figured just to start with it, like, what do you know about the origin of how he ended up being given the Mongolian gimmick in the first place?
He got the Stomper gimmick from Bob Geigel in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. You know, he was Archie the Stomper Gouldie, and I don't know if Bob just didn't like the name or if he just saw him, because he did kind of have a face, that kind of looked Mongolian, and he just came up with that. I don't know where it came from, other than Archie always said that's when he got there. They said, "You're the Mongolian Stomper." And he said, "Okay." And I don't think that he thought it would stick like, it did for the rest of his life.
So that match on YouTube, him against Spaceman Frank Hickey, that's from that first run, I guess, because he's still talking and all that.
Yeah, he was trying to perfect it. He had, he should have had a manager from day one. He should not have been talking himself, and that's obvious from history repeating itself in Memphis and Knoxville and from Kansas City. Because once he spoke in that, Canadian accent, you knew right away he wasn't Mongolian.
Right.
Yes. Stomper had been broken in by Stu Hart in, I think, 62, and he had been working prelim matches. He never got a main event match, so he realized he had to get away and go somewhere, and the first place he went outside of Calgary was Kansas City, and right away he was given that Mongolian Stomper gimmick.
Yeah, and it's interesting watching that video because there's not really much to the gimmick yet. He still just kind of looks like Archie Gouldie. And he's also not, like, because the whole thing that's weird is that eventually he became an incredible promo. The problem was that he had already gotten over and become this huge, scary heel as the Mongolian Stomper in the States. So he couldn't use his amazing talking ability in the States because everyone knew him as the Mongolian Stomper who doesn't talk. But here he's not really good at that yet. But he has that presence, even though he hasn't really fine-tuned the gimmick yet. I mean, you can kind of see that he already knows what he's doing and all that. And
he had not became the monster yet.
No.
He became a monster. I mean, that's when I was a kid, he wrestled every Tuesday night at the Parks and Rec in Johnson City. And it was a long rectangle building with bleachers on both sides, and then a balcony with bleachers, and then on each end was a set of bleachers that they pulled out, and the wrestlers came out from the far end, baby faces on the right and heels on the left. Well, there was no guardrails. This was before music. The only light was the light over the ring, So there was always fans lining the aisles as they came down. When the Stomper came to the ring, nobody was on that side. They'd look at the program, knew the Stomper was coming. They split. People were terrified of him. And had good reason.
Well, Beau, before we talk to you about Stomper's actual history in both the eastern end and western end of Tennessee, I'm just curious about you as a fan. What were your first memories of the Mongolian Stomper?
The first memory that I have is the video that I put up of him, that Les Thacker, that film that Les put together that they sent to the territories, just showing him annihilating people and busting blocks over his head and all that stuff. But, by the time he got here New Year's Day of 1977, and I was born in 1974, so the real early stuff, I don't remember, like the Garvin run, the Duke run, but I'm now very familiar with it from reading and hearing stuff. But, they got him over the first day that he was here, which was New Year's Day. Every year Fuller on New Year's Day ran 2-ring battle royal. Some years he had the world champion, some years he didn't. But he had that 2-ring battle royal with everybody in the territory, plus they would bring guys from Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, Memphis, all the territories. Stomper's first day, he hits the ring. He throws everybody out of ring 1 into ring 2. He then goes into ring 2 and throws everybody out of ring 2. He eliminated everybody. He went through the entire territory in one match. Wow. And was made.
Yeah, that'll do it. that'll do it. Well, you mentioned that he came to Knoxville on New Year's of 1977. He had already been in Memphis in 75. He showed up managed by Bearcat Wright and had a big feud with Lawler. He ended up winning the Southern title and went back and forth with Lawler over it. And then Bearcat left. I'm not sure what his issue with the office was. And before they got him a new manager, which ended up being Al Green of the original Heavenly Bodies, Don and Al Green, there was a very brief period of time where he actually did his own talking on Memphis TV. And by all accounts, it was disastrous for the gimmick, having him go from being the monster to talking. What did he tell you about his first run in Memphis?
Well, the stuff that's out there that people talk about is him and Lawler. But if you really want to get an appreciation for that first run, find him and Bob Armstrong. Both of them, I think that is the best of their career. Just, this was before Bob had the accident where his face was smashed, and both of them were young men and in their prime and could go. And I mean, they were having those classic Tennessee bloodbaths and fighting, and that is something, if you've never seen that, which the Lawler stuff is easier to find because Lawler kept his own stuff at somewhat. But, there is stuff out there of Armstrong and Stomper, and it's well worth looking up. But that was the run, that made both of them stars in Tennessee. And it's just, you have to see it, which I saw it live in 88 when they had the run with USA, which by that time, they were going 5 and 6 minutes a night. And like Stomper told me, he said, we're not selling time, we're selling excitement. So they got it done in 6 minutes. But he had a great run with Lawler. And a lot of things people don't remember, too. They automatically, when they hear Stomper, they think that he was the heel. But he had a run with Lawler where Stomper was the babyface.
Really?
When they had got so much heat on Lawler and Lawler's army, who can stop him? Well, Stomper was part of the army. They switched him babyface because Lawler wouldn't tag him when they had the match with Fargo and Rocky Johnson. So he grabs Lawler, pulls him in the ring, beats him up. Lawler gets the chain, does a number on the Stomper. So then they went off to the races with Stomper chasing him. And they just kept putting the Lawler's army in front of him, and he was going right through him, going after Lawler, which was great because now you had this guy that they knew, man, he's going to kill him when he gets a hold of him. And Lawler running from him, and they got a good run out of that, which they redid that in Southeastern in Alabama. And this was the only time that when they switched him babyface, they were smart enough. We need somebody to talk for him. And they had Austin Idol do the interviews for the Stomper. They did the same thing like in Memphis. They did it here in 79 when they switched Stomper to babyface, and he did his own interviews. And I mean, it was like the first time he talked, people said, well, he's not Mongolian, and he had been here for 3 years, and nobody would even dare imagine that he was not.
That Austin Idol run in 1983 is some really great stuff. It ends up with Austin Idol and the Stomper training each other. There's a big angle where Austin Idol had wrestled Ric Flair, and there was a disputed ending, and Ric Flair was going to come back and wrestle him again. And Mongolian Stomper was training Austin Idol in ways of getting into and reversing the figure four. I believe Robert Gibson was the young wrestler Austin Idol was doing the figure four on. And then there was an interview segment where the announcers, Charlie Platt and, I forget the second guy.
Rick Stewart.
They say that they spoke to Ric Flair that morning, and Ric Flair says he has the cure for Idolmania. And Austin Idol is sitting at the desk, and the Mongolian Stomper is standing behind him. And Austin Idol says, I don't know what he meant. And at that moment, Mongolian Stomper goes, I know exactly what he meant, and beats the crap out of Austin Idol, slams him to the desk. The angle's so great because the announcers react like this is the worst thing in the world. They run away, and it's a really effective turn because it hadn't been teased at all.
And that's one way where you could have him talk. Like that fits.
Yes.
Because it's one quick sentence and it leads right into the angle. The lasting image is not that he spoke.
Right.
Well, Going back to Memphis, in 75, he ends up losing a loser leaves town match to Lawler at the end of October, and he leaves Memphis to return in 78 for a little while as a babyface, and then he turned on Jerry Lawler and became a heel again. And when I think about the Stomper, I think about in 79 in Memphis, he was managed by Gorgeous George Jr., obviously J.J. Dillon and Don Carson and Bearcat Wright and Al Green and Tom Ernesto. He had Ron Wright, of course, the original King of Kingsport. He had so many managers. Well, what did he tell you? Was there a favorite manager that he had, and someone that he thought was most effective?
He was real close to Don Carson. They kept up with each other all through because like he would, we'd be in town somewhere and he'd tell me I talked to Don this week and tell me what was going on with him, and so he was real close with him. He was close with Ron Wright, which that's the two greatest heels that this part of the country ever seen. Completely different kind of heels, but those were the two best drawing heels that were ever here. But Gorgeous George Jr. He never said anything bad about him, but I don't know how close they were. Other maybe just it was business. They just worked together, but really weren't around each other. JJ was a short-lived thing in Texas, but Don Carson was that was his guy. That was the guy that he always considered to be his manager, and they were together here 2 different times here. They were together in Georgia. They were together in the Gulf Coast and San Antonio. So, they had a long history with each other.
Yeah. He had big feuds in Southeastern with Ron Garvin and Joe LeDuc and Austin Idol. What do you think was his biggest feud in Southeastern?
The one that everybody talks about, when you start talking about the Stomper, is Joe LeDuc, because they put LeDuc in the hospital for 2 weeks. I mean, shoot, they almost killed him. Archie hit him in the head with a sledgehammer.
What?
And they come out the week before, and Stomper sit down, and Gorgeous George Jr. busted the blocks on Stomper's head.
Right.
Well, neither one of them knew what they were doing. So the hammer went through and it hit Stomper. He no-sold it on TV, but ended up spending the day and a half in the hospital. So they come back next week where LeDuc goes out there and he says, anybody can do that. I'm as tough as he is. I'll sit down and let you do it. Well, right when Gorgeous George is getting ready to swing the hammer, Stomper takes it away from him and he swings the hammer. He's so strong, right the back of the head.
Oh.
And live TV in Knoxville have to hold the show up, showing tapes, paramedics in there, they take him to the hospital. He stays for 2 weeks. Newspaper going by every day. This is attempted murder. I mean, we got big, major press. And it was backed up with pictures of him in the hospital, doctor's quotes. I mean, people knew this is legitimate. So they send baby faces over to the hospital every day to check on Joe LeDuc, make sure he does, if he needs anything, check on him, check on the family, do all that stuff. Well, Jimmy Golden goes over there on a Friday, and he comes to the building, and he says he's not there. He checked out. He's gone. He said, I went by his apartment. Nobody's there. They thought he had left to go home to Canada. So Robert Fuller and the Stomper, that night's the main event. Fuller's out to get revenge for his friend. Well, they get Robert down, beat him, got juice on him and pounding on him, and through the front door, carrying an axe, comes Joe LeDuc.
Awesome.
Nobody knew he was coming. Not the Stomper, not Gorgeous George, not Robert Fuller, not the referee, nobody. When George and Stomper see LeDuc with the axe coming down the steps of the arena, they were for sure he had come to kill them. And they split. They took a powder. And he got in the ring, grabbed the microphone, and said, guess who has come home? And they had a huge run after that. And it was physical, blood, axes, sledgehammers. I mean, you name it, and people bought it, and they come to see it. And, you know, that was the match that Stomper is mostly remembered for here, but also Garvin, him and Garvin, you know, they'd switch Garvin babyface to work with him. Both of them guys physical, tough as nails, you know, and I got a little clip of one of their matches up on YouTube right now that I put up a few years ago.
Right,
you know,
78, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean, they had no problem hitting each other. You know, they had no problem being physical because it was, you know, this was pretty much a tough guy's territory. I mean, there was a lot of tough guys in here over the years, and people were used to that. Yes, it had all the crazy, not all the crazy, but it had some of the Memphis, you know, craziness of the different wild gimmicks in here. But it also had a lot of legitimate wrestlers like Stomper, Garvin, you know, guys like that could tie you the knot and hurt you. Bob Roop was another one that comes to mind.
Bob Orton.
So it was Bob Orton Jr., yes. I mean, it was so it was a perfect mixture of everything. And I think that's what made it so special. And it was just right here in this part of the country. If you didn't live here, you never saw it. Yeah. So it was our wrestling. That was ours. We knew that was ours. And we were proud of it. And they were, and the men in the ring were proud of the product they were putting on for us.
Yeah, I mean, even in the magazines, they never really talked about East Tennessee at all.
No.
Fuller didn't want him here. he would not let the magazines come.
What was his reasoning for that?
He didn't want the rest of the country to know what he was doing.
Really?
Yeah. If you look, he did not start getting magazine coverage until about 84. And that was in the smaller magazines. And that was mostly fans sending stuff in.
Huh. So he was it for the reason you were saying, like because the fans liked that it was their wrestling, or was it like or was there something else as far as he didn't want anyone else to see what he was doing?
Well, I think he was afraid too if people knew what kind of business they were doing, they're going to try to raid the talent, or they're going to maybe try to come in and run some of the town's opposition. You know, he kayfabed, the Welch family kayfabed themselves. So, you know, they still do.
I mean, it's not that unusual. I mean, just for a second before we get back to Stomper, like, you know, the story you always hear all the time about the first, well, not the first big Superdome thing, but the JYD Michael Hayes match at the Superdome, that when they drew that big house at 28,000 people or whatever it was, that all of a sudden people in wrestling hearing about it, like, who the hell are these two guys? Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, Michael Hayes was, 19 years old. You know, no one had ever heard of Sylvester Ritter, even then, I mean, it took some time also because it was a new promotion too, that just no one really realized what was going on. So, I mean, it makes sense that someplace like, you know, East Tennessee, where they kind of had their own crew of guys to a point that they would have been kind of off the radar. And like you said,
even Kazana didn't get magazine coverage. He didn't want it. The only magazine coverage that you find pre-Continental is when Ron Wright would let him come to Johnson City. Mm-hmm. Ron didn't care, and Gene Gordon would come over from Charlotte or send somebody, or Al Shockley was here who would take pictures and send. And it was never like they came just to see that big event, because they ran every week. Every week was a big event. So just whatever happened to be on the card that week that Gene Gordon was here, that's what got out there. And usually Ron tried to make sure that if he knew Gene was coming, they were going to be in the chain match. And he knew it would be bloody pictures and, you know, just two guys beating each other to death. So he knew that would show the rest of the country, man, there's something different about these guys. You know, the only thing we ever see about them, they're all bleeding and beat half to death.
Now, was it known, like, among the wrestlers and, like, the promoters and that, like, in Tennessee and Alabama and, you know, the other places that Stomper worked, was it known, and like, well at all, that he could talk as well as he could? If he was, you know, in another gimmick or whatever?
Yeah, well, I'm sure they knew, but I mean, why? Why would you mess with it?
No. I know. I'm just asking more if they knew, if there was an awareness of it, like, because it
well, you know, really, I don't know, because really they didn't care what went on anywhere else.
Yeah.
So they probably had no idea. They probably just, you know, they knew he went up there and worked at home and at times and did this and that, but probably not. Because I mean, I don't see Ron Wright or Ron Fuller or you know, any Ole Anderson or anybody else sitting down to watch, you know, an hour of Stampede Wrestling.
I mean, the reason I bring it up, though, I think Brian will agree with me, is to me one of the fascinating things about the Stomper is that you have those two sides to him. That at home, you know, where he grew up in Canada, he's this amazing promo, and he's scary in both personas and both gimmicks. But in Tennessee and elsewhere in the Southeast and in Texas and all that, he doesn't talk, and both are scary, but in completely different ways.
Yeah, but you know, even he didn't have to speak, even if he didn't have a manager. You know, just put him on camera and let him make the faces that he made. Rick Connor's old-time Knoxville wrestler used to say, Archie's face is Murder Incorporated. You know, because he had these faces that he would make in the ring, or he could make, where, I mean, he was not the most handsome man to begin with, but he looked like a monster. I mean, he had this evil-looking face that he could make that would just scare you to death. And that was just he was such a nice guy away from the ring. He's such a helpful person to me and a lot of other people along the way over the years, you know, but he knew what he was selling. He knew his product, and he knew how to take care of it.
Well, Beau, what was the first time that you actually had seen any of his work in Canada where, you know, he wasn't the Mongolian Stomper, he was just the Stomper Archie Gouldie? What was your first experience of seeing that version of him?
Sometime, let me think here, early 90s, because he was telling me about it. And I had no idea. I'd never seen Stampede other than little bitty clips that Pedicino would show on This Week in Wrestling. So he had told me about the Run with Bad News and all the, you know, different stuff. And I found somebody that had those set of tapes that they put out years, you know, after it happened, with Ed Whalen hosting, like, the best of Stampede. And that was really the first time I had seen him not being the Stomper.
Well, you know, you mentioned Ron Garvin before, and there must be something special about Tennessee that attracts all these Canadians. Obviously, Archie Gouldie is from Western Canada. Did he ever tell you what made him fall in love with Eastern Tennessee to the point that
the
he
mountains?
Lived his life? Same thing with Stomper. When they seen these mountains, same thing with Garvin. Garvin lives in the Appalachians now. He lives 2-3 hours from me up in West Virginia, on top of a mountain. Mr. Fuji lives here. He came to Knoxville, never left. So just that simple. He loved the mountains, and he decided to move there.
Yep. And they like, you know, the cost of living here compared to the rest of the country is not bad. It's a good place to raise a family. He raised a family here. You know, they could leave. Plus, here's another thing. When he finished up here, he can go to Atlanta. It's 200 miles from Knoxville. He can go to Birmingham, 200 miles. Nashville, 180 miles. Louisville, about 200. Charlotte, about 230. So it's right in the middle of everything. So he could go work other territories and still have his home base in Knoxville.
Well, you mentioned Georgia. Obviously, he was there several times, and one of the things that is available on YouTube for people to see is, I believe while he was national heavyweight champion in early 81, he had a match with Andre the Giant, which is very interesting because Andre ends up selling more than he normally would for an opponent.
Oh, they were very good friends. They just loved each other.
Really?
And yes, Andre would sell for him like nobody else. Same thing with Garvin. Andre would, especially knowing that Garvin, was 5'8", 215 at the most.
Yeah.
And Andre would sell for him. But I don't know if that was. I know it was respect, but I don't know if it was from where Andre had come to Canada before he came here, and they just had that kind of bond, or I don't know, but I know that Stomper loved Andre, and Andre loved him. Stomper used to go over to his place in North Carolina, to his farm, and visit with him.
Wow, interesting. Well, let me ask you. You said he got to Knoxville in '77 at New Year's, and obviously he was in Memphis in '75. That gives him approximately a 20-year run. Because even, in the early 90s, Jim Cornette was able to bring him into Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and even though he was older by that time, he was still quite effective. And, me and Bix were talking earlier about there's a really wonderful video out there that Ron Head shot in August of 1993 of Kevin Sullivan versus the Mongolian Stomper, and it's actually great. A lot of people should watch it. What did he tell you about late in his career, his thoughts on working for Smoky Mountain Wrestling?
And I'll throw in USA, too.
Well, he was also my champion at the same time that he worked for Cornette.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was working for me. Here's the deal. His last national run was with Vertigania, 86 into 87. He came back to Knoxville after that, went to work for the Sheriff's Department. He had a 20-year run with the Sheriff's Department, retired from there also. But he wrestled every weekend somewhere. He was one of those first guys that you could see on independent shows in North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, East Kentucky, East Tennessee, and Georgia, because he would work Monday through Friday at the sheriff's office. He'd be booked Friday and Saturday night somewhere. And then when he was USA run, he would work during the day at the sheriff's office and work whatever town, because USA territory was small. Furthest trip was Pikeville, Kentucky, 170 miles maybe. So he wrestled up until about 1998. He never stopped until around that time. He was still working all the independents around. People call up and book him, and he was a machine. I mean, he was in his 50s during that run with Cornette when he was working for me. And here's the kind of guy that he was. He was my champion, and he came to me and he said, "Look," he said, "Jimmy's called, wanting to use me on these dates, this and that, the whole deal." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, he's like, do you want to take the belt off of me? Or, what do you want to do?" And I said, "No." I said, "Because it's only going to help me. If you're on his TV making my towns, it only helps me. So no, I'm going to make money and I'm happy." And it worked out for us. But I mean, he had a great run here. And that was, like when I first started using him, that was the deal. I brought him in as a bounty hunter to go after Mike Sampson and GQ Stratus, the $1 Billion Babies. And then they worked a little program, and then I'd leave him off for a few months, and then I'd bring him back, leave him off a few months, bring him back. And, that way he was still special every time he came back. And the last little run that he did for me was as a babyface. And, but people loved him. They respected him, and they knew he was legitimate, And I tell people I was terrified of him as a kid. And then I got in the wrestling business, and then I really became scared of him because I could see what he could do. But here's the thing: I don't believe in luck. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I believe in blessings from above, and I have been so blessed to be around so many top guys at a young age. And Stomper, like when I first started running, I used Ron Wright, and Don Wright, and Rick Connors, a lot of these old time East Tennessee guys on my first shows because they had name value. And Ron Wright was the guy that gave me the Stomper's number. And he said, call the Stomper and use him. So here I'm a teenager, a kid, but I'm running towns. I mean, it's not like I'm just getting somebody's number and calling and harassing them. But I'm scared to call the Stomper. I've talked to everybody else on the phone and dealt business with him, but it was just something about him. So, and I'd heard stories, like if you called the Sheik and said, hey, Ed, he would hang the phone up. So if you called back and said, hey, Sheik, he would talk to you. So now I don't know when I call, do I ask for Archie? Do I ask for the Stomper? What do I do? I'm sitting there at the phone trying to figure out what do I do? So I called him and he answered the phone and I said, can I speak to Archie the Stomper? And he just laughed. And he said, who is this? So I told him. He says back to me, I've heard your name. I know what you're doing up there. So I knew right then he talked to either Ron or Don or Rick Connors or somebody. So I knew, okay, we're all right. And he says, just call me Archie. And I said, I got these dates. And I said, what would you need to come in? And I have no idea what he's going to ask for. I mean, I had no idea. And he says, look, if you can pay me $100, I'll be happy. He could have got a lot more. But he was, he wanted everybody to make money. The gas was, not nearly what it became, and it wasn't far trips for him. He could an hour and a half up here from his house. So he was making money. But I also would take care of him. If the house was better, I took care of him better. But he was always there for advice and always there to help me. But, like, they started running this place in Knoxville. They were trying to recreate Southeastern wrestling at the Shohowie Park. And they had got this little flea market amphitheater and was calling it Southeastern and wrestling other stars. And they're trying to recreate it with some of the guys that worked there. And I was just happy to be booked. And I'm working in opening matches at heel doing jobs. So Archie's there, and he stands up one night and he tells Joe Kazana and Chris Powers, who were booking the deal, he says, let the kid be my manager. And I about crap myself. I'm thinking, what? So they said, well, can he talk? He says, he'll be fine. He didn't know if I could talk or not. I didn't know if I could talk. So he comes to me and he says, here's the deal. You go out with me. I'll tell you what to do. Don't add, don't take away. Do exactly what I tell you, and we'll be fine. And I got to stand ringside and watch him work week after week during that short run. It only lasted maybe 8 weeks through the summer. But 8 weeks in a row, I was under him, learning how to be a heel, watching what worked and what didn't work. And he didn't do that. He didn't need me. He could have went out there and did the same thing without anybody speaking. He did it to help me. And that's the thing that, it's hard to tell people that's only seen him as the Stomper, as this murderer, what a nice guy he was and how he was there to help you. And he would help anybody as long as they acted like they wanted to learn and would work hard at it. He would be right there to help teach you and mold you and take you along the way. And the other side of that, he was not anybody that you ever wanted to mess with, period. Because, young kid, we're some little town around Knoxville, and I'd already wrestled this before I started managing him. I'm done. I'm just waiting to get paid. I'm sitting in the back. And in comes through the dressing room this young guy that was working with a Stomper, and he's running to get away. And then the Stomper comes in the dressing room, and the young guy goes, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir. And he's backing up. And Archie's going at him just like he would stomp across the ring coming at somebody like a bull. Nobody moved. Nobody took a breath. The guy's going, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. He backs into the wall. He has nowhere to go. The Stomper gets to him, and he's got that Murder Incorporated face on him. With his right hand, he reaches out with his pointing finger bent and his thumb. He grabs the guy by the Adam's apple and puts him to sleep in a matter of seconds.
Ooh.
And he lets go, and the guy just slides down the wall. Nobody's moved. Nobody's said a word. It's like a church in there. It's so quiet. And the Stomper turns around, and everybody's just in fear. And he goes and he sits down, and it seemed like hours, but it might have been a minute. And you hear him in that polite Canadian voice. All he had to do was listen. If he would have just listened, he wouldn't have had this happen.
Beau, obviously the Stomper had a different reputation amongst different promoters. I'm just curious if you are aware of what he felt or what he thought about the Fullers, specifically Ron Fuller, and also what they thought about him.
He loved Ron Fuller. He was loyal to him. You know, Fuller left here, went to Mobile, he went with him. Fuller got the book in Atlanta, the Stomper went. Fuller got the book, you know, wherever he went. He went for Robert. He loved the whole family, and he was loyal to them. You know, but, you know, they were loyal to him, and they were a great mix. They made money together. And I've never heard of them having any troubles. Now, it's not even the only negative thing you could say about the Stomper is he would get homesick, whether it was for Knoxville or Calgary, and he would just leave without giving a notice.
Right.
Just go. You know, and he did it in Atlanta twice. He did it when he was a national champion. But the other thing was he had this in his mind, well, if I give a notice, they're going to beat me on the way out. And if I get beat on the way out, I'm no good here ever again. And I don't know where that little part of him came from, because here he had no problem doing it for me. I was scared to death the first night I went and asked him to. You know, and it wasn't, you know, for one of my boys, hey, this is what we need. And I'm thinking, oh, God, you know, because I knew that reputation. And he said, I'll work it out. It'll be fine. Don't worry. But, you know, he left here a couple of times to go home to Calgary. But I think more than homesick, it was more he wanted to see his family. And, you know, as he got older and they died off in Canada, his trips got less and less going home. And, you know, this truly became home right here.
You know, we talk about his career in Tennessee and in the Southeast, and we talk about his career in Calgary. Was the Stomper a wrestler who had in his possession much footage or tapes of his career, either there or here? Was he someone who had a collection of matches that he could show people? Or what did he have in his possession?
Well, here, get ready to freak. I just had this discussion with Dave the other day. He had every match that he ever had with a world champion on 3/4-inch tape.
Whoa.
He had the videos that were made of him sent around the country. He had a lot of his career, and he was so. Like I kept telling him, I said, Archie, let me tape this stuff, and you know I'll get it put on whatever media at the time, whether, you know, it was VHS and now I would do DVD, you know, whatever. Let me have this stuff. I'm not taking it. Just let me, you know, borrow it for a week, and I will take it to my guy at the TV station and have it put on what we need. And it never happened. Now, what's going to happen to those tapes or who's got them, I don't know. I know that he had a very close friend of both of ours, Colin West, who was helping take care of Archie here at the end. You know, they had asked me to put together some stuff, and like that Kansas City stuff that's now on YouTube and some other rare stuff that I had, and trying to help his memory. And I've been working on that for a while, and you know, he passed before I could finish it. But he had all of his matches with the world champions. He always got a copy of that. He had some of the stuff from Memphis and some stuff from Calgary. So he had a collection of footage of himself that I hope somebody calls me and says, hey, can you still put this over on DVD?
Yeah. Oh, that would be tremendous. You know, there's so many wrestlers you hear about who in their older years don't have any footage of themselves at all. And it's always,
right.
It's always so sad to me.
Right, and sometimes they don't even think it exists, and then, like, all of a sudden a tape trader or someone gets in touch with them or a family member, they're like, oh, my God.
Yeah.
Or someone gets in touch with
Paul
their
Jones.
family. Yeah.
Paul Jones, I got some of his stuff from Australia. And I told George South, because George talks to Paul about every day. And I said, George, and I can't remember what was the name that he used. It's his real name.
Al Fredericks.
Yes. And I said, George, is this Paul? And he said, yeah. I said, man, I got some matches from Australia. So George said, hold on a second. So he called three-way. Paul didn't believe it. He called us liars. He said, nobody has that stuff. So we got together and sent it to him. He couldn't believe it. You know, and there's stuff out there. But, you know, a lot of these guys, their careers were before VCRs. You know, and it just, and I think a lot of it, too, like, look at the footage that has survived the Memphis territory compared to what has survived the Nashville territory and the Knoxville territory.
Yeah.
It's just, there was people there. I just had a guy email me last week who says he has Nick Doulis TVs from Chattanooga, 81 to 83.
Whoa.
I've heard this story before. I'm going to Mobile in a few weeks. I said, I will stop in Chattanooga and meet you. I'd like to see him. It's time to put up or shut up. You know, I want to see this stuff. But who knows? Maybe he does. I mean, I'm convinced it's out there. We just don't know who has it.
Beau, how long had the Stomper been sick?
He had a bout with cancer 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And he got pretty sick then, but he beat it and he came through it. And then about 3 years ago, I guess, we started hearing that his memory was going, that he was having problems remembering people, places, names. And then here in the last 2015, it got real bad. You know, it got to where he really didn't know what was going on or where he was at. I mean, he would have moments where he was with it, knew what was going on, but the very next moment, you know, he couldn't tell you anything. Ron Fuller came back to Knoxville to visit some family and stuff, probably around Thanksgiving, I guess. And somebody had called me, said Ron was trying to get hold of Stomper, and I said, well, I'll hook it up. So I called Colin, but Colin said, you know, he'd love for him to come, but, you know, tell him to be prepared. He may not know who he is. You know, and that's kind of, you know, in a way, I haven't seen Stomper since all this started because I didn't want that to be the last memory that I had of him, knowing what he was, knowing the machine that he was. This is a guy that would ride his bicycle from his house in Knoxville nearly 40 miles to Morristown, wrestle, get back on his bike, and ride home. Now, who have you ever heard doing that before?
Wouldn't he bring one of his grandkids with him on the bike sometimes, too?
Yes. He did not really lift weights. I don't know that he ever lifted weights. He did Hindu squats all day long. He rode that bike. He'd ride a marathon every day on the bike. He would take those, he called it a bullworker, you know, the big spring with the handles on the end that you bend, and he would work out with them things all day long. And I've seen him more than once take one and bend it so far that he would break the spring. He had tendon strength. I mean, if he got a hold of you, you weren't going anywhere. You were his. And, you know, working with the sheriff's department, one of his deals was he worked in the jail and he worked as a bailiff. But one of the things was they would come down there and say, look, we got a warrant for this guy. And last time we went to get him, he beat up 5 of us. We need help. And Archie would go by himself and bring the guy back. You know, there's a famous story of he took shackles and, you know, the guy said, I ain't going nowhere. And they got in the fight and Archie got the shackles around him and he pretty much drug the guy into the back of the cruiser by his neck. And when they got to the courthouse, the guy had no fight left in him. Yes, sir. No, sir. I will go wherever you want me to go to, sir.
Well, as we wrap up this segment, Beau, once again, we want to thank you. You have definitely become our resident expert on East Tennessee wrestling here on the 605 Super Podcast, and a very popular guest, and someone we will certainly be having on again and again and again and again. And I guess in closing, what is the legacy that the Mongolian Stomper leaves behind in East Tennessee, and what is his place in East Tennessee and overall Tennessee wrestling history?
Well, for East Tennessee, without a doubt, he was the second greatest heel that we ever had. And then that's just trailing behind Ron Wright a little bit. And then you put them together, it was magic. Longevity, I mean, the guy headlined cards here for 25 years, you know, and he leaves an emptiness when he passed, you know, when each one of them passes, you know, that's a part of our childhood that goes. To me, that not only was a part of my childhood, that was a special part of my life. That was a man that I respected, I looked up to. He was friends with. When I started promoting, my mom and dad was always there, and you know, selling tickets or concessions. And my dad was out front as the promoter, even though I was doing everything. And my dad and Archie became good friends. And my dad was the first person I called when I found out about Archie passing, because Dad always asked about him. But whenever I would see the Stomper, he would always ask me, "Hey, how's your family doing?" You know, it wasn't just, "Hey, how," I mean, he would always like sit down and talk to you about, you know, what was going on. And he would tell you about his kids and grandkids. I mean, he was truly a good man, a good person, you know, which is hard to find those among this crazy business. You know, you all, I'm sure, can testify to that from dealings you've had with people. But Archie was a good human, and he's going to be sadly missed by the people that loved him, because everybody that dealt with him and really knew him, he was a special part of our life. He was something special. He was a man's man. He was a hero. Even though we went and cheered for him to lose, he was still a hero to all of us.
So there it is. You know, Bix and I really wanted to do a special show today about the Mongolian Stomper, and this is kind of the kind of things we want to do going forward when something happens. You know, we have a lot of different people we like talking to on the show, and we like presenting the history of professional wrestling. And we want to thank Heath and Beau for the time they spent with us. You know, one of the interesting things in that interview with Beau, Bix, you know, here we are. We always search for wrestling footage, and we find out that the Mongolian Stomper had 3/4-inch tape of all of his championship matches and who knows what else.
I know. What? I mean, I hope it was saved, and I hope that someone does something with it.
Yeah, I hope Beau gets his hands on it, because he will actually preserve it and make sure that it gets out there. But, I mean, who knew? I mean, that's the thing I always say, you know, where people say, "Oh, this is lost, this is lost." You never know who has what.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember if I mentioned it on one of the previous shows, like once at Wrestling Classics, that Ray Gunkel's like granddaughter or something posted and said she had a couple reels of 2-inch tape. There are people who are going to have stuff. They may not know what to do with it, or they may not realize what they have. I mean, there are so many situations. There's more stuff out there. I mean, we've talked about, you know, on and off the air about some of this stuff. There's more. I mean, there are also things that got disposed of, but there's still more.
That's right. Well, we talked to Beau, and we talked to one of Beau's very good friends for this week's Dentist of the Week, our weekly segment, remembering the late, great independent promoter from New Jersey, Dennis Carluzzo, a great friend of mine and a great friend of professional wrestling. And this week we spoke to Alan Barry, or I guess his name would be Al Getz, the Duke of New York, a prominent manager, website runner, I guess we could say after what's coming up in a second, promoter at times, future podcaster. But we had a really fun little discussion with him about Dennis Carluzzo, and here it is. This week for the Dentist of the Week, we have with us Al Getz, the Duke of New York, I believe was his nickname as a wrestling manager. I remember him from Dennis's shows in, I want to say 98, 99, maybe a little bit before that. But Al, welcome to the show. And what are your memories of Dennis?
Well, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I have a great story about the first time I met Dennis. So at the time I was a wrestling manager, and at the time I was using the name The Duke of New York. I lived in North Carolina, but I also ran a website called Woo, which at the time was one of the only sites that covered all these independent promotions. And I actually hosted Dennis Coraluzzo's website, and part of the deal was, I'll do your website if you, book me, and if we can work out a deal for, merchandise to sell tapes on the site. So I really wasn't expecting to get booked by Dennis just because it's a really long drive, and I don't know how that all works, but ended up doing a website for another promotion that was starting up that Mike Illians and Dave Prazak, I think it was the IWC or the AWC?
I think AWC.
AWC. And they this was the weekend of their first show, which was that big tournament that was won by Nova.
The Great Eight.
The Great Eight, yes.
That's right.
I was booked on that show. I delivered what might have been the worst promo of my career on that show. But because they were looking to bring me up, and Dennis was actually running a show. I think he was running both nights that weekend, but he was running a show on Friday night, and so agreed to book me on the show. So I drove up. I actually stayed with Steve Carino, and we drove to Dennis's show together. Steve wasn't booked, but he just wanted to come hang out. We were horribly, horribly late. We got there before the show started, but we got there probably 20 minutes before the show started, which for your first time, you definitely don't want to do that. But we walked in the door. I said my hellos to everyone, introduced myself to most of them, sat down, and the second I sat down, I hear, "Where the fuck is Alan Barry?" Alan Barry being my real name. "Alan fucking Barry, where are you at?" And I'm like, I'm here. Dad's like, "Where the fuck you been? I've been looking for you." I'm like, "I was looking for you. No one's told me what I'm doing tonight." I just totally, made it sound like I had been there for an hour trying to find him, walking through the halls of the gym. But he brought me into his office, and I ended up that night. I managed Joe Rules, who I believe in one of the first PWI 500s, he was either not the first one, but I think the second one, he was either number 500 or number 499. So he had 15 minutes of fame, and years later he had some more 15 minutes of fame when he appeared on the Jerry Springer Show wearing a diaper and nothing else. Back when Debbie Combs and Mike Rogers and a couple other people in wrestling were booking guests for Springer. So I managed Joe Rules, and then I also managed the Honky Tonk Man that night in his match against King Kong Bundy. And basically, I was there to protect them for the finish because they basically did nothing. And then I held King Kong Bundy, which makes no sense because there's really no physical way I could hold a man the size of King Kong Bundy if he didn't want to get out. But I held him. Honky Tonk Man came running in. Bundy moved. Boom. Honky hit me, and it distracted him enough that he took the only bump of the match and got pinned right there. But you played that video of Dennis doing the locker room speech, and he was talking about the restaurant as a sponsor. And the gimmick was to get paid, you had to go to the restaurant most of the time. Which let's just call it like it is. It's brilliant and it's evil at the same time. But the restaurant would pay a significant amount of money to be the sponsor, and it helped Dennis bring in some pretty big names. And the wrestlers, most of them are going to want to go out after the show anyway, so they go to the sponsor restaurant and spend enough money that I guess the sponsor makes back most of what they spent in the first place. But Steve and I weren't having any of that. I think we each ordered a Diet Coke and just sat and waited and waited and waited. Dennis showed up an hour after we got there, which was 30 minutes after the show, and instantly ran into the restroom and locked himself in there for another 30 minutes. And at this point, so remember, Steve didn't even work on the show. He's wanting to get back home. We've got a 2-hour drive, maybe an hour and a half, 2-hour drive to Pennsylvania, and he's just ready to go. And to be honest with you, Dennis and I had never even really discussed, what the booking fee was. So I'm just sitting around, I could be waiting all this time for $5, $20, a handshake and a hot dog, who knows? But finally, after 30 more minutes of Dennis hiding out in the bathroom, he opens up the door, and who's the first person to get paid? Me. I was really excited, and it was a very nice payoff. And whatever people can say about Dennis, and they can say a lot, and it's probably all true. Some of the best payoffs I ever got in wrestling were from Dennis. Most of the time, it was because I was babysitting Buddy Landell or picking up, Doug Gilbert at the airport in Baltimore because it saved them $100 to fly the names into Baltimore instead of Philly. So I would be booked, and I would drive up and stop at the Baltimore airport and pick up Doug or pick up the Honky Tonk Man and take them up to the show. So Dennis, as much a character as he was, he really took care of me, who's a nobody manager from, at the time, North Carolina, and I will never forget him for that. But I will also never forget, Alan fucking Barry, where the fuck are you?
That's great. And let me ask you, what are your thoughts on and memories on some of the other characters that were around the Dennis scene, as it were?
I mean, there are characters everywhere you go. I know, obviously, the guys that were part of Dennis's clique that are still really good friends to this day are Donnie B and Rick Ratchet and Rocco Dorsey. I remember Harley Lewis and Derek Domino were a couple of characters.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But I wasn't much of for going out afterwards with the boys and getting into all sorts of trouble. So most of the stories probably, missed me. But Dennis had a motley crew if there ever was one. But he really did his best to integrate the names he brought in with the regular crew. I remember he brought Sid in. And the post-match was almost like all the heels just, ran out and almost formed a single file line to go in and get powerbombed by Sid. But Dennis was kind enough that if anyone was willing to get powerbombed by Sid, go out and do a run-in. And I don't even think they told Sid, who was coming more, aside from the first two. But there was like a conga line of people just running in the ring, getting booted in the midsection, bending over and getting powerbombed by Sid. They roll out the ring and the next one comes in, same thing.
I think that might have been the third annual Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl in Philadelphia, and if I remember right, you were on that show. Do you have any memories of that show?
Well, that was a different show, but the third annual, it would have been 98 was the one I was on.
Yeah.
It was basically Steve Corino versus Rick Ratchet, and if Steve won, he and I would get 5 minutes with Donnie. If Ratchet won, Donnie would get 5 minutes with me alone. And so the best part of all this was I showed up on crutches. And it was there was a big convention all weekend long. Every time I was in public, I was on those crutches. Just try, so that we could do a thing where, I would try and weasel out of the stipulation, blah, blah, blah. In the match, we build to a spot where the ref is distracted and I'm supposed to come in, throw down the crutches to show that I was fine all along and, hit Ratchet. And for some reason, I just forgot to throw the crutches down, and I rolled into the ring, hobbled across it on crutches, hit Ratchet, and then hobbled back and rolled out. I have no idea why I did it, but I did. But eventually Ratchet won. Donnie beat me up. The urban legend is that Dave Shearer offered Donnie $50 to shoot on me because Dave and I had a little heat going on. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not, but we did have heat. But I also remember at one point, Donnie, we went out of the ring, and Donnie sort of slammed my head into the guardrail, and he had his fingers all wrapped up in my hair, and I decided to just throw myself down on the ground, and to the point that Donnie, since his fingers were in my hair, it ended up pulling my hair out. And I remember someone posted on a message board that Donnie then took the hair and threw it into some fan's lap in the front row. And he's like, I mean, these guys must really hate each other. He ripped out the Duke of New York's hair. It was crazy. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then in the back, Dory Funk and Tommy Gilbert did an angle and didn't tell any of us. But Dory ended up jumping Tommy in the back while Marty was filming it. And we all thought it was a shoot. It was really, really weird. But that's just at Dennis's shows. Just everyone did whatever they wanted. Really, it was chaos, but it was really great times. And a lot of those guys from the Northeast crew really went on to great things. And we were talking about the Great Eight. I mean, pretty much everyone in that tournament had their moment in the sun. I guess except for Reckless, who he just seemed to come around at the wrong time, or I don't know. It's really a shame that Reckless doesn't get his due compared to everyone else from that scene. I mean, Dennis, there's just so many stories with him. He was what he was. I mean, it was a game to him. With sponsors and backers, he's like, I'm gonna screw you over, and you know it. But it's a game, because now that you know, I'm going to try and do it even more, and you're not going to know when and where I'm going to screw you over, but I'm gonna. It was almost like a game, and I'm tempted. There's a classic Dennis quote, but since I heard it from a third party, I don't want to say it just in case I got it wrong. But if you ever get the chance to ask Steve Carino about what Dennis said about nuns, you should do so.
Okay, I think that's a perfect spot to leave it. Well, there it is, our Dennis of the Week, our popular feature every week by Dennis Carluzzo. And with that, I think we've run really long this week, Bix. Of course, this was a special episode, and we had some really great stuff. But I think we may be about to tap out, right?
I think so. It sounds like we're about to get all sugared out. I mean, that no one's going to get that reference, so that was probably a bad choice of words there.
Yeah, I don't get that reference.
Sugar hold. If you can sugar someone, you can put someone out with the sugar hold.
You could put someone out with the Shinnaminaki, which was the finishing maneuver of the Mongolian Stomper, which somehow we didn't mention at all.
Oh, how did we not talk about the Shinnaminaki?
I just realized we didn't mention the Shinnaminaki once.
You're mispronouncing Shinnaminaki.
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 There we go.
Yeah, it'll come out different each time. There used to be that great newsletter, the Shinnaminaki Post.
That's right. Yeah, I should ask Scott Hudson on Facebook, because a while back he asked me, "Hey, do you want to be on my wacky Christmas card list?" I'm like, "Sure." He sends me.
How do you say no to that?
Right. He sends me a burnt CD or DVD. He did up artwork for it that had a scan of every single issue of the Shinnaminaki Post, and I should ask him if I can put that online.
Oh yeah, you have to. We may have to build out our website just for that.
Yes, that would be that's a good idea. And I wonder which I'm trying to think who else used it that it was called the Shinnaminaki. Lord Humongous was the Shinnaminaki.
Right. Did anyone use that hold before him? Because obviously Slaughter, it became the Cobra Clutch and then $1 Million Dream for Ted DiBiase.
And was with Mass Superstar, I think it was both the Shinnaminaki and the Cobra Clutch.
Was it Cobra Clutch with Mass Superstar?
I think after Slaughter started using it, he did call it Cobra Clutch. And the weird thing about that, too, is that... So did Slaughter bring the name Cobra to G.I. Joe? Or did Cobra exist? Because there was no real G.I. Joe folklore before the cartoons, was there? Or storyline?
The cartoons were launched season 1 of the cartoons was launched right around the same time of season 1 of the action figures and season 1 of the Marvel comic.
Of Real American Hero, but that's mid-'80s.
Yeah.
And the Cobra Clutch as a finisher name existed, and the Cobra Corps, that existed before the G.I. Joe cartoon. So I'm saying, did Sergeant Slaughter bring the name Cobra to G.I. Joe?
Not sure. I think G.I. Joe started 81, 82. Maybe 83, but I think 82.
The Real American Hero action figures, you mean?
Yeah. And originally it wasn't, remember in the original theme song, it was G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro. And then eventually Destro didn't have his own distinction anymore. It was just against Cobra.
Right, he was part of Cobra's thing. I used to...
There was a lot of internal politics going on between Major Blood and Destro and the Baroness and Cobra Commander for who would be the leader. And then Sir Panther came along and threw everything out.
When I was a little kid, I didn't watch G.I. Joe or Real American Hero that closely. And I used to think that Destro was Cobra Commander. Because Destro looked so much cooler than Cobra Commander. Why would Destro not be in charge?
Yeah. He almost was, really, season 1. He almost had his own faction. And then Cobra Commander just, he had the money behind him. So he was able to really just run with it.
Slaughter was much better at booking that cartoon than the AWF.
I don't know. How much of that cartoon did he book?
It's a joke.
Well,
not a very good one.
That great David Bixenspan humor. You can hear more of that every week here on 605, the Super Podcast. Well, now it's time for everyone's favorite part of the show, the plug section, and everyone can now take bets. So David Bix will be able to cleanly get through the plugs. But before we get there, I do want to mention that Bix and I have now created a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/superpodcast. And we're going to try to have a little fun on there with our listeners and our community. And, we'll post links, we'll post pictures. It'll be a place to have fun. So check it out, facebook.com/superpodcast. Bix, it's your turn.
By the way, if I would have taken that bet, I would have taken that bet against me being able to get through this successfully.
What were the odds? Yeah, really.
All right, so let's see what we've got this week. On Between the Sheets, we are covering 1998. So that includes the second annual WCW/NWO Sold Out pay-per-view, as well as Mike Tyson's first appearance on Raw, including something I didn't remember, or at least that was in the Observer. There. Remember the whole thing where Vince asked Tyson who his favorite wrestler was as a kid, and he blurts out, Bruno Sammartino.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah.
And it was in the Observer that was all planned with the idea that Vince looking uncomfortable and Tyson saying that would make it seem more spontaneous, or then that the Austin part would seem more like a shoot.
Oh, then he should have answered David Schultz or Kevin Wachholtz.
If that is true, that is an all-time great Vince McMahon is a genius moment.
mention George Zaharian. It'll make me uncomfortable.
But remember, Bruno was genuinely Tyson's favorite wrestler.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, so we've got Jordan Breen from Sherdog as our guest this week. Jordan, better known for his Twitter account and for his work as an MMA writer at Sherdog, and very, very funny guy. If you've heard him on his MMA podcast, he's as funny or funnier here. Big wrestling fan, especially during this time period, followed everything in Japan and all that. So really good show this week. Of course, you can check that out on Place to Be Nation. If you haven't read my Big Show article at SB Nation long form, check that out. We talked about that a bunch last week. If by some chance you haven't read it yet, please check it out. Got a lot of great feedback. Dig.com, which is the site that I guess what would be the best way to put it? It was Reddit before Reddit was Reddit, and then they kind of changed their own thing. They had it up last week as one of their long reads of the week. So that was cool. So yeah, check that out at sbnation.com/longform. The new issue of Fighting Spirit magazine came out last week with the articles I had been talking about on here, an interview with Tom Pritchard in the training grounds section, just talking about different things with wrestling training and psychology and storytelling and whether or not wrestlers misunderstand when people say slow it down, that type of thing. Good stuff. If you enjoyed the thing I did with Steamboat in the training ground, you also like this. And also have a little editorial about, why I'm pessimistic about WWE this year. As always, Fighting Spirit's great. Check that out. fightingspiritmagazine.co.uk. Also, if you're subscribing online, probably the easiest way is to do it through Pocket Mags, because then you can subscribe and use it in their apps on whatever platform. And of course, everything I do, each week, whether it's this week's Figure 4 Weekly, further covering the Hulk Hogan Gawker stuff, everything at SE Scoops, MMAnews.com, all of my regular gigs. So just check those out. And of course, follow me on Twitter at David Bix. So Brian, what do you got this week?
I'm thinking one of these weeks we should do a Bix 60-second challenge and see if you can get all your plugs in within 60 seconds. And if you do, you win a prize, like a free hot dog and a soda from Whitey Ford's Grand Slam. This week,
just mention Vicious Vincent.
Just mention Vicious Vincent and get thrown out into the snow. This week, once again, as I was last week, I will be on the Jim Cornette Experience, available at mlwradio.com and on iTunes and wherever you steal your favorite media from. And once again, I'll be his anger management therapist. Oh boy, my tongue is playing tricks on me. And you'll actually
now
hear him
how it feels.
Yeah, where's my 60-second challenge? You'll hear Jim get a little angry because I sent him a couple clips to watch, and one of them was something he despised in every way, shape, and form. So you have to listen to hear that. Also, there's a lot of other fun stuff on there. We talk about the Mongolian Stomper. and as we do here. So it's really good. And actually, Jim will be on our show next week. So listen to me this week on the Jim Cornette Experience, and listen to us next week to hear more fun with Jim Cornette, just like we had with him previously here on the show. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it. So, well, until next time, we've got 2 words for you.
Follow me on Twitter. That's 3 words.
Yeah, follow. Yeah, how should everyone follow you on Twitter?
I'm at Twitter.
No, you're at Great Brian Last.
At Great Brian Last on Twitter. And until next week, tally-ho!
Camera over there, take a look at this man. Take a look at him. Take a look at his son there. I broke his neck. I crippled him. I helped the son of a gun die. Look at this, Archie. Take a look at him. Look at the man here.